Chapter 221, The Disaster That Devastated the World. Lucian stood at the edge of the ravaged clearing. Without so much as drawing his wand, he lifted his hands and called forth a brilliant sigil of white light that hovered in midair. A ray of light, field of light, light's explosion, rain of light. Blinding beams lashed out in every direction, shattering darkness and sending shadowy wraiths screaming away. As the last echoes of his holy magic faded, Lucian's eyes glowed with renewed purpose. He wove a second spell. A second, even more intense circle blazed to life over his torso, its runes crackling. Bone fist of the giant, his muscles swelled grotesquely, arms thickened to the size of tree trunks, veins pulsing with raw power. With a single, earth-shaking punch, he obliterated a massive oak and sent debris and unfortunate onlookers hurtling through the air. But Lucian wasn't done. His entire form stretched upward, growing until he towered more than 30 feet tall. "Gigantism," he announced, voice booming like thunder. At this colossal scale, his strength eclipsed that of even the mightiest giants. He brought his enormous hands together in a deafening clap that unleashed gale-force winds. Then, raising one gargantuan fist, he smashed it into the ground. Professors Snape and Dumbledore, standing nearby, staggered as the earth quaked beneath them. Had they not known Lucian was purely human, they might have sworn a true giant strode before them. In an instant, the towering figure shimmered and collapsed back into Lucian's normal form. Breathing steadily, he extended a hand and traced an intricate glyph in the air, every motion precise, every spell cast with purpose. The battlefield lay quiet once more, save for the distant rumble of collapsing ruins and the low murmur of awestruck survivors. Lucian took a deep breath, then addressed the two most powerful wizards in the courtyard with a confident smile. Word magic. He traced an intricate pattern in the air, and glowing runes materialized, spinning like living letters. They hovered between him and the astonished onlookers, each symbol shimmering with latent power. Barrier magic. With a graceful sweep of his hand, Lucian summoned a translucent dome of silvery light. It expanded outward, then collapsed back into nothingness as if he'd never conjured it. This is transmutation magic. He touched a pebble at his feet. In the blink of an eye, it liquefied into quicksilver before solidifying once more into a gleaming statuette. Dressing up magic. His tattered coat and scuffed boots blurred, then reformed into a perfectly tailored navy ensemble that hugged his frame. Mimic transformation magic. Lucian snapped his fingers, and a perfect doppelganger of Dumbledore appeared at his side, copying the headmaster's posture and expression down to the last detail. Mirror world magic. A rippling oval opened beside him, revealing a shadowy, inverted realm on the other side. Professor Snape's lips parted in a silent gasp. Dumbledore's eyes, normally so bright, were solemn with wonder. Lucian let the portal fade. He stood tall, chest rising and falling, then spoke in a voice that held a quiet intensity. "All of this I learned from my grandfather, but now I'll show you the greatest gift he gave me." Electricity crackled across his skin like living flame. Blue-white streaks danced up his arms until he seemed surrounded by a storm. "This is the electromagnetic cannon." He reached behind his back and produced a slender silver sickle. With a practiced flip, he launched it into the air, then poured 200 million volts of crackling energy into its blade. The sickle became a supersonic bolt of lightning, hurtling toward the ancient stone wall that marked the edge of the courtyard. In a deafening roar, it tore through the rock, carving a broad tunnel in seconds. The courtyard fell silent. Dust settled on shattered stones. Lucian stood before the gaping maw he'd created. Snape staggered back, eyes wide with horror. "By Merlin's beard," he whispered. Dumbledore's usual twinkle was gone, replaced by a grave awe. They understood at once. A single strike of that power could wipe out 90% of the wizarding world. Most witches and wizards relied on wands, gestures, and spoken chants, each spell demanding at least a second of focus. Only a few elite masters could cast wandlessly, instantly. Yet here was Lucian, demonstrating an evolution of magic far beyond their textbooks, far beyond their imaginations. Faced with Lucian's supersonic electromagnetic cannon, there was no time to raise a magical shield or mount a counterattack. Its power was too fearsome. A single blast would have torn them apart instantly. Lucian's voice rang out across the clearing. "Next up, the Thunder Titan, Prepare the enlarged railgun. Magnetic energy crackled around him, coalescing into a towering thunder titan more than 30 meters tall. Just as Lucian prepared to fire the supersized railgun, Dumbledore stepped forward, wand raised, and spoke a swift amplifying countercharm. "That's quite enough, Lucian. We believe you. Revert to your human form." Obeying immediately, Lucian's immense avatar dissolved in a cascade of sparks, leaving him once more at normal height. All around, trees shredded by stray bolts quivered and hissed, bark scorched and splintered. With a quick flick of his wand, Lucian muttered a repairing charm. Branches knitted back together, charred wood smoothed, and within moments the forest was returned to its former, undisturbed state. Above them, owls and other nocturnal creatures stirred in alarm, a reminder of how this display could have roused every magical beast in the Forbidden Forest. Not to mention the Aurors and Dementors now guarding every exit of Hogwarts. Dumbledore had no desire to push matters further. Lucian offered a respectful nod. With Professors Dumbledore and Snape at his side, he lifted smoothly into the air. In a flash of crimson light, the three of them soared off toward the headmaster's office, leaving the moonlit clearing silent once more. Lucian strode back into the office, eyes wide with excitement. "Actually, I still have more to show you." Both Dumbledore and Snape instinctively raised their hands to halt him. No, really, we believe you," they insisted, though each of them looked more baffled than convinced. They exchanged uncertain glances. In their decades of practice, they'd encountered every branch of magic known to the wizarding world, the stately, deliberate rituals of ancient spells and modern charms that build on those foundations. But what Lucian displayed simply didn't fit into any category they knew. His magic required no wand and no familiar incantations, yet it surged with astonishing speed and raw power. Ancient magic might be slow and potent, modern magic a refined evolution of it. But Lucian's arts came from a completely different system, one whose principles eluded even their most seasoned minds. His creation of a thunder giant and his devastating railgun attack lay far beyond the bounds of any textbook or theory they'd studied. Even with all their expertise, they couldn't begin to understand how he had taught himself such impossible spells. They could think of no other explanation for what Lucian claimed, magic taught to him directly by the gods. After a moment's silence, Dumbledore cleared his throat and addressed Lucian with measured caution. "Did these gods ever reveal who they are?" Dumbledore asked, "or why they chose to teach you magic?" Dumbledore found himself believing perhaps 70 or 80% of Lucian's story, but a lingering doubt still gnawed at him. Lucian had anticipated the question. "The old man never gave me his name," Lucian explained. "He only said he was a god. He said that in 20 years' time, a catastrophe would strike the world, one capable of wiping out every single human being. He claimed I was the one chosen to stand against that disaster, an existence born precisely to meet the end of humanity." Snape's dark eyes narrowed, and Dumbledore's expression grew grave. "Tih," they said in unison. "What kind of disaster could annihilate all humankind? Even the return of Voldemort could not erase every last person on Earth. A calamity of that magnitude was beyond imagining." Now, more than the identity of Lucian's divine teacher, Dumbledore and Snape found themselves fixated on that coming cataclysm, and on the young man who might be the world's only hope. Lucian cleared his throat and embarked on his extraordinary account. "Honestly, I don't fully grasp all of it myself. I'm simply relaying what the old man told me. He said that beyond our world lies a vast universe filled with civilizations far more advanced than ours, civilizations like the Xandarians, the Kree Empire, the Skrull Empire, and many others." For the next 3 hours, well past midnight, Lucian spoke without pause. He outlined star empires, cosmic fleets, interplanetary politics, and strange powers beyond anything Hogwarts had ever encountered. By the time his tale ended, the clock read 2 in the morning. Lucian allowed himself a brief, triumphant smile. Fortunately, this world had no legends of Marvel, so he could borrow freely from their stories to convince Professors Snape and Dumbledore. At last, he summed it up. In 20 years' time, an alien warlord named Thanos will arrive with a cosmic army to conquer Earth and annihilate humanity. The gods who taught me magic intend for me to stand against him and protect our planet. Silence followed. Severus Snape sat motionless, his dark eyes unblinking, as though Lucian's words had knocked the wind out of him. The sheer volume of unfamiliar information left him unable to respond. As a Slytherin scholar, Snape possessed almost no knowledge of the Muggle world, let alone alien civilizations. His cosmic expertise rarely extended beyond reading the stars for divination. Albus Dumbledore, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his silver beard. A thoughtful gleam danced in his eyes as he weighed the unbelievable claim. An intergalactic invasion guided by a single warlord, and a lone, god-taught wizard standing in its path. But what Lucian described was undeniably real. The alien empires, those vast space battleships, and their astonishing powers and civilizations didn't sound fabricated in the slightest. Chapter 222, The True Savior, Second Update. Inside his spacious office, Albus Dumbledore leaned back in his armchair, lost in thought. He had long since taken a keen interest in Muggle history and technology, especially after Grindelwald's prophecy of a devastating world war had come true and humanity unleashed nuclear weapons. With no teaching duties tying him down, Dumbledore had the freedom to delve deeply into every facet of the non-magical world. Thanks to that, he could grasp much of what Lucian had just revealed. "I never imagined those Muggles were correct about extraterrestrial civilizations," Dumbledore admitted, steepling his fingers beneath his beard. "It's remarkable, yet troubling, that their technology falls so far short of the cosmic powers. They simply lack the means to aid us in any meaningful way." He sighed, then fixed Lucian with a solemn gaze. "You mustn't share this information with anyone else, at least not yet. We can't risk inciting panic throughout both magical and non-magical communities. It's late. You should get some rest." "Understood, Headmaster," Lucian replied, bowing his head respectfully. With a final nod, he turned and left the office, slipping into the quiet castle corridors to seek much-needed sleep. Lucian stepped out of Dumbledore's office with a calm smile plastered on his face. He replayed the looks Snape and the headmaster had exchanged behind closed doors, snippets of suspicion, surprise, and grudging respect. In his mind, he reviewed the architecture of his little crisis. It hadn't been concocted for theatrics alone, but as strategic leverage. If both Snape and Dumbledore were convinced that he truly was a chosen savior, if even a sliver of belief took root, they'd be far more inclined to indulge his requests for magical instruction. Guidance on the Fidelius charm. Training in the Vulcan method. Even a time-turner, perhaps. Worst case, they'd remain half-doubtful. Best case, they'd bend over backward to assist him. There was nothing to lose. They wouldn't brand him an enemy. After all, he'd already demonstrated his raw power and willingness to use it in the Forbidden Forest. That display wasn't just a flashy bit of magic. It was proof that, regardless of their beliefs, the formidable Lucian would never defect to Voldemort's side. Dumbledore, of all people, had to appreciate fate's hand in these things. He'd spent years molding Harry into the prophesied savior, placing trust in the unseen currents of destiny. Lucian was confident that, by playing his cards right, he could steer both professors into viewing him as an ally and a very promising student. As he headed down the corridor, Lucian couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. It wouldn't be long before his crisis served its true purpose, opening doors to the deepest secrets of magic at Hogwarts. And when it did, he'd be ready. "As for what we'll do if there's no alien invasion in 20 years?" Lucian asked with a wry smile. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. By then, I might have forgotten the whole thing. Or if I'm feeling dramatic, I'll stage a play about the invasion just to entertain everyone." Dumbledore chuckled and glanced at Snape. "Severus, your thoughts?" Lucian slipped away, leaving the two headmasters alone in the dim corridor. Dumbledore turned to Severus, curiosity in his pale eyes. Snape hesitated, the memory of the Forbidden Forest still fresh in his mind. "I cannot bring myself to believe he's lying," Snape admitted quietly. "Did you see the magic he unleashed out there? Powers beyond anything this world should possess. Aside from the gods, I can't fathom who, if anyone, could have taught him that. And the level of detail in his account of the disaster, no child his age could invent something so complex overnight." Dumbledore nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Indeed, in the forest, I felt that Voldemort's threat, terrifying as it is, pales in comparison to what Lucian described." He paused, eyes drifting to the distant horizon. Then, almost to himself, he sighed. Dumbledore sat very still, his gaze fixed on the flickering lamp in front of him. The revelations Lucian had just shared weighed heavily on his mind. If Lucian was right, even Voldemort, dark wizard though he was in his prime, would be powerless against this purple devil, a force said capable of obliterating the entire world. For decades, Dumbledore had feared Voldemort's return. Even if he couldn't destroy the Dark Lord outright, his own magic wouldn't allow it, he had hoped to keep Voldemort at bay long enough for Harry, the Chosen One, to grow strong. He had devoted himself to training Harry so that, when the time came, the boy who lived could end Voldemort's reign once and for all. But now the threat of the Purple Devil loomed larger, its scope so vast that all of Dumbledore's careful plans against Voldemort suddenly seemed inadequate, even trivial. He couldn't be certain Lucian was speaking the truth. No one could be, but the stakes were too high to ignore it. "What do you think we should do?" Dumbledore asked softly, turning to Snape. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of a crisis that might yet eclipse every danger they had ever faced. Albus Dumbledore stroked his silvery beard, plucked a toffee from the dish on his desk, and popped it into his mouth. After savoring the sweetness, he spoke, "Since the gods have ordained this, we'll carry on as usual and trust that he'll avert the great cataclysm in 20 years' time. If Lucian needs anything, let's do our utmost to provide it. Please tell him my office door is always open. If he ever has questions about magic, he may come to me at any hour. I'm hardly as powerful as the deities who taught him, but the more varied his magical training, the better prepared he'll be." In truth, even if Lucian truly possessed the power to save the world, there was little Dumbledore himself could accomplish. He could not single-handedly reform the entire wizarding community or forge an alliance with the Muggles to confront a crisis 2 decades away. Despite his reputation as the most powerful wizard alive, Dumbledore recognized his limits. He was only marginally stronger than his peers, and many forces lay outside his control. All he could do was continue to guide Lucian and trust in the gods' plan. It would also give everyone more opportunities to speak with Lucian later and confirm whether his startling account was true. The very next morning, the moment Lucian stepped into the auditorium, the younger students snapped to attention and saluted him. He'd grown accustomed to this kind of reception. After all, he'd spent most of last year in the limelight, yet this term's enthusiasm was noticeably more intense. From first years to 7th years, nearly every young wizard stared at him with wide-eyed awe. The reason, of course, was that he'd killed a Dementor on the train just the day before. To most witches and wizards, Dementors are as mythical and terrifying as the bogeyman tales their parents whispered when they were children. You dismiss the bogeyman as you grow older because you know it doesn't exist. Dementors, however, are all too real, and even squibs and adult muggles alike tremble when they hear the name. What makes them truly fearsome is that not every wizard can fend them off with a Patronus charm. In the Middle Ages, anyone capable of conjuring a corporeal Patronus was hailed as a prodigy, enjoying unrivaled prestige in the magical community. So when word spread that Lucian had driven a Dementor away with nothing but his wand, young wizards everywhere were convinced they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. As a result, most wizards who encountered Dementors stood no chance. They became little more than prey, unable to mount any defense. "Lucian, report to my office after breakfast." He had only just taken his seat and opened his mouth to speak when Professor Snape's voice cut through the silence. Chapter 223, Fusion of the Plasma Cannon and the Electromagnetic Cannon, 3rd Update. Dean Slater's office was quiet, save for the soft scratch of quill on parchment. Seated before Professor Snape, Lucian braced himself as Snape folded his arms and studied him intently. "I've spoken with Professor Dumbledore," Snape began, his voice low but firm. "The headmaster and I both believe your account. We'll do everything in our power to help you master magic and develop the strength you'll need to face the crisis 20 years from now." Relief flooded Lucian. "Thank you," he managed, his voice catching. "I was afraid you'd think it was nonsense. Even I sometimes struggle to accept it." Snape's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, as Lucian pressed on. "There's just one problem. Between the daily drills Grandpa taught me and my regular schoolwork, I never have enough time to practice everything." "Not enough time?" Snape exclaimed, waving a hand as if brushing the concern away. "We'll remedy that at once. I'll apply for a time turner on your behalf. That should give you the extra hours you need." Lucian's eyes widened. "A time turner? Really?" "With your talent," Snape replied, dipping his quill to the parchment, "I would have recommended one when you began third year next season. But why wait? Consider it done." As Snape sealed the request with a flourish of magic, Lucian felt a surge of confidence. Extra hours to train meant a better chance of mastering both Grandpa's techniques and the curriculum at Hogwarts. And with Dumbledore and Snape behind him, he was one step closer to meeting the challenges the future held. With the time turner in hand, Lucian can carve out extra hours alongside his regular lessons to hone his abilities. What would have taken him 20 years of steady practice could now stretch to the equivalent of 40, surely enough to persuade even Professor Dumbledore. "Time turner?" Lucian asked, feigning ignorance. Professor Snape was only too happy to explain. "The time turner lets you reverse time by up to 5 hours in a single use," Snape began. "But once you've gone back, you cannot activate it again until the moment to which you've returned has passed. For example, if you wind it back from 5 a.m. to midnight, you cannot immediately turn it again to travel from midnight to 7 p.m. the previous evening. And after you return to 5 a.m., you must wait until the clock moves past that hour before using it once more. I've discovered through trial and error that my time turner has strict limits. If I activate it at 6 in the morning, I can only rewind 1 hour. At 7, I can wind back 2 hours. At 8, 3. And by 10 o'clock, I can reverse a full 5 hours, landing me at 5 a.m. precisely. According to the Ministry of Magic's temporal regulations, only 2 versions of a witch or wizard may coexist at once, never 3. In practice, that means even at its maximum use, the device can at best double your available time. These laws aren't natural constants of our universe, but rather the Ministry's safest, most stable guidelines, distilled from their decades of research into time-turning technology. Of course, one could choose to ignore these precautions, rewind 12 hours in a single go, or keep turning the hourglass until 7 or 8 copies of yourself stand side by side. If you're fortunate, you might walk away unscathed. If you're not, you could simply vanish, or worse, unleash a catastrophe that ripples through your family and bloodline, ancestors and descendants alike. Just ask the unfortunate witch Heloise Mintab. Lucian's immortality meant he could outlast entire civilizations. Aging 500 years in an instant held no personal terror for him. What did unnerve him, though, was the thought that a single misstep in time magic might unleash havoc across the world, or even collapse reality itself. Before he attempted to master the deeper mysteries of temporal arts, he resolved to learn the correct, methodical use of the time turner. Even the modest boon of effectively oobling his waking hours each day felt like a miracle. Outside of his regular lessons, he now had the freedom to conduct experiments, refine new spells, or devour books he'd long postponed. Immortality had also reshaped Lucian's relationship with sleep. No longer did he require 8 hours of nightly rest. An hour or 2 of shut-eye sufficed to refresh his mind. Still, he was well aware that he could not eliminate sleep entirely. Consecutive nights without rest might not kill him, but the mental fatigue would creep in, dulling his focus and undercutting all his scholarly efforts. On an otherwise routine afternoon at Hogwarts, Lucian completed his potions and charms assignments and headed back toward the castle's west wing. As twilight settled, Professor Snape summoned him to the dungeons. There, with his usual grim precision, Snape reminded Lucian of the strict protocols governing the time turner's use. This was their second meeting on the subject, and Snape's dark eyes betrayed how deeply he feared the consequences of any misuse. With the device safely returned to Lucian's possession, and Snape's cautions echoing in his mind, Lucian made a quiet vow. From this day forward, his entire existence would revolve around mastering time magic without risking even a moment's chaos. And so began Lucian's relentless regimen. By night, he sacrificed what little sleep he allowed himself. By day, he pored over dusty tomes and practiced intricate temporal spells. With each passing hour, he edged closer to his goal. wielding the flow of time itself with perfect, unerring skill. Lucian's time turner whirred through nearly 5 rotations each day, pushed to its very limit. Beyond attending his regular classes and poring over books in the library, he devoted almost every spare moment to Professor Dumbledore's office, hungry to learn magical arts no ordinary curriculum could offer. With Dumbledore's ready availability and his unrivaled mastery over the arcane, Lucian seized a golden opportunity. Under the headmaster's guidance, Lucian's own powers shot forward by leaps and bounds. Spells he'd once fumbled with grew crisp and assured. Unfamiliar incantations fell swiftly under his command. Dumbledore, already steeped in the secrets of ancient magic, introduced him to long-forgotten rituals, the mountain-shifting charm, the conjuring of tempestuous rainstorms, even the fierce vortex of a tornado. So voracious was Lucian's appetite for knowledge that, on more than one occasion, the usually unflappable headmaster found himself gently overwhelmed by an endless parade of questions. Dumbledore's schedule, though free of formal lectures, remained packed, his advancing years sometimes struggling to match Lucian's relentless curiosity. Still, the young wizard's earnest respect and careful consideration made every lesson a pleasure rather than a burden. Together, they charted new frontiers of magic, 2 generations bound by a shared passion for discovery. After speaking with Dumbledore, Lucian reshuffled his schedule to carve out time with Professors Snape, McGonagall, and the other faculty. Though they still had their classroom duties, each professor managed to free up a few hours here and there. While Harry Potter's clone plunged headlong into a grueling study marathon, Balthazar's panda clone in the magically bound realm was advancing just as quickly. Until recently, the panda's every waking moment had been spent in deep meditation, pushing toward the level 500 breakthrough and the immortality it promised. Now that he had finally reached that milestone, he cut back on his meditation sessions and began dedicating more time to practical spellwork under Master Balthazar's guidance. Today marked his greatest achievement yet. He successfully mastered Merlin's mightiest incantation, the Plasma Cannon. In this world, all magic users share a fatal vulnerability to electrical shock. A stray current running through the body scrambles one's mana, causing spells to backfire and leaving the caster defenseless. That's why most wizards and witches favor insu, lated leather boots and garments whenever they work with storm or lightning magic. Lucian, however, had no such concern. His power flowed directly from his pure wizard bloodline, granting him perfect control even over the most volatile energies. Lucian sat cross-legged in the quiet chamber, focusing on the flow of mana through his veins. Meditation wasn't just a way to calm the mind. It was the key to unlocking the full potential of his wizard bloodline. Already, his command of magical energy far outstripped that of the world's native mages. And now, with his newly awakened electrokinetic talent, he could channel up to 200 million volts of raw electricity. Ordinary electrocution no longer posed the slightest threat. He thought back to David's battle with Morgana. David had rigged a bank of scientific instruments to unleash continuous electric discharges, disrupting Morgana's spellcasting until her magic unraveled. Then, like the trigger of a machine gun, he fired round after round from his plasma electromagnetic cannon. Even Balthazar, whose single plasma shots packed far more punch, could manage only one blast at a time, whereas David had hammered Morgana with relentless barrages. Lucian had just mastered that same plasma cannon spell, but so far he could condense only one egg-sized bolt per casting. However, his fourth-tier ability, and that staggering 200 million volt reserve, opened new possibilities. What if he could merge the rapid-fire power of the super electromagnetic cannon with the destructive force of his plasma magic? The idea sent a thrill through him, a weapon more devastating than any seen before, capable of overwhelming even the mightiest foes. With that thought, Lucian's eyes snapped open, his mind already racing through the first steps of the fusion spell. Chapter 224, The Power of the Plasma Electromagnetic Cannon, Revision 1. If he could merge the two spells, it would become a plasma electromagnetic cannon, sometimes called an electromagnetic isobaric cannon. For simplicity, Lucian thought he might just call it the isoelectric cannon, or the electric isobaric cannon. "Let's see if this works," he muttered. With a crackle of magic, Lucian apparated to an empty stretch of land just outside New York City. He immediately wove a muggle-shielding charm around the perimeter and erected a sturdy magical barrier. Then he squared his shoulders and spoke the incantation. Plasma cannon! He folded his hands, closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and then opened them. A glowing amber plasma orb, no larger than an egg, hovered between his palms. Under ordinary circumstances, he would have pointed and released it in one explosive burst. Today, however, he had something more ambitious in mind. Electricity danced across his skin in brilliant blue arcs. Lucian drew the current into his arms, channeling every spark directly into the fragile plasma sphere. As he poured power into it, the orb quivered and grew, first to the size of an apple, then swelling again into a ripe pear. Lucian forced a steady breath, keeping the raging energies in balance as he prepared to test his new creation. Lucian steadied himself and raised his hands to channel another surge of electricity into the plasma sphere. This time, however, his control wavered, and the orb detonated in a blinding flash. When the light faded, a jagged crater more than 10 meters deep gaped in the ground. Lucian's body hummed with power, yet he remained unscathed. Years of rigorous training had taught him to master even the most violent currents. He wiped sweat from his brow, gritted his teeth, and murmured, "Again." He reset the containment field and began the incantation, determined not to let one failure stop him. Blending raw superhuman energy with arcane magic to forge a new weapon was proving far trickier than he'd anticipated. His previous experiments, using ancient runes to summon massive lightning strikes for the Thunder Titans to absorb, had felt more like a brute force fusion than a true synthesis of disciplines. Even when he'd swapped the archaic rituals for high-voltage machinery, the Titans still simply drew power as if from a battery. Ingenious? Yes. New? Hardly. Each trial ended in explosive disappointment. Sparks rained down, coils melted, and scorched earth was all that remained. Yet Lucian refused to concede. He activated the transdimensional comlink, and in an instant, his voice echoed through countless realities. "Listen up," he commanded. "Pause every mission, every research project. I want all hands, every Lucian clone, focused on perfecting the electric cannon. We will break through this barrier, or we will break ourselves trying. Now get to work." 5 days of round-the-clock work by Lucian and his 5 astral doubles, augmented by the temporal converter he'd acquired in the wizarding world, added up to the equivalent of 30 days' worth of labor. At long last, he'd perfected his newest technique, the plasma electromagnetic cannon, a devastating fusion of raw magical energy and his own superpower. Lucian strode onto the wide-open training plateau, clutching what looked at first like an egg-sized orb of humming metal. He tilted his head back, closed his eyes, and poured a crackling surge of electricity into it. The little sphere pulsed brighter and brighter until it swelled to the size of 2 basketballs in his hands, its surface dancing with violet arcs of lightning. "Plasma electromagnetic cannon," he intoned, voice rolling with power. With a sudden forward thrust, Lucian sent the orb blasting ahead. It erupted into a blinding plasma beam that sliced through the air like molten metal. Across the valley, a 300-meter hill bore the full brunt of the attack. The beam struck squarely in the center, instantly vaporizing earth and stone, leaving a crater where solid rock once stood. Still, the true marvel, as what happened next, the beam didn't dissipate. It stayed coherent, hanging in midair like a glowing blade of pure energy. Lucian gripped the beam's trailing edge and guided it in a smooth arc. The light-carved laser cut cleanly from the summit to the base, bisecting the hill in 2 perfect halves. He lowered his hand, and the plasma beam collapsed in a final flash. 2 towering slabs of earth tumbled apart with a thunderous roar, and dust exploded into the sky. Lucian exhaled, a fierce grin spreading across his face. In all his experiments, nothing had ever felt so right. Lucian watched as the plasma column crackled and writhed before him, an eerie echo of the little fire girl's ultimate move from that mobile game he'd obsessed over in his former life. Only instead of scorching flame, his attack consisted of superheated plasma. 10 seconds later, the column collapsed in on itself, vanishing in a spray of ionized mist. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Sustaining a coherent plasma stream for more than a handful of seconds had been the culmination of endless practice and research, And although 10 seconds wasn't much by some heroic standards, the raw power was undeniable. Once he reached superpower level 5, he told himself, this technique would be truly devastating. If only he could use it in his thunder giant form. Lucian turned to survey the ruined hillside in the near distance. Shattered stone, upturned earth, and scorched crags where the plasma blast had struck. He sighed. If he could fuse this plasma electromagnetic cannon with the ancient magic blessing of the Thunder Giant, he could probably fell 10 ordinary holy tier wizards in a single salvo. After all, the Thunder Giant's core ability lay in manipulating electromagnetic forces to draw out iron-rich sands and bedrock from beneath the surface, then channel all that mass into an even larger, more powerful cannon blast. Someday, he vowed, he would master that union of arcane and superhuman might. For now, though, 10 seconds of plasma was more than enough to prove he was on the right track. Lucian paced in front of the prototype cannon, his mind racing. As designed, the plasma electromagnetic cannon channels every volt of electricity straight into the plasma stream, powerful but with a fatal flaw. In its current form, it can't both condense the Thunder Giant and absorb ancient magic lightning. There's simply no way to split the flow. But Lucian saw a path forward. If he could elevate his superpower from level 4 to level 5, he could divide the energy feed evenly, half to condense the Thunder Giant, half to charge the cannon, and then draw in ancient magic lightning to fuse with the plasma. The result? An ultimate plasma electromagnetic cannon capable of leveling an entire city with a single shot. He let out a slow breath. No need to rush. We'll do this methodically. With that decided, Lucian apparated away, reappearing inside David's hidden laboratory below the subway station. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he set down his tools. The next step, he murmured, is mastering the soul separation and soul sealing spells. He ran his fingers over David's spellbooks. The soul separation spell, an arcane incantation powerful enough to wrench a soul free from its body, had been Balthazar's key when he extracted Morgana's essence from Veronica's form. The complementary soul sealing spell would be equally critical, allowing Lucian to bind any liberated soul once he'd learned to sever it. Outside, the rumble of passing trains faded beneath the lab's vaulted ceiling. Lucian settled at the workbench, his resolve sharpened. Level 5 was in sight, and with it, the ultimate fusion of technology and ancient magic. Lucian stood quietly in the ruined hall, replaying his plan in his mind. He knew that if he wanted to force the resurrection spell from Morgana's lips, he had to confront her alone. With Balthazar and David at her side, any attempt at coercion would be nearly impossible. Yet going it alone posed two critical challenges. First, here was the matter of raw power. Lucian's plasma electromagnetic cannon had already proven itself superior to David's machine gun plasma cannon. One well-placed shot would be enough to finish Morgana. He had little doubt he could win a straight fight. The second, and far greater, difficulty was keeping Veronica alive. Morgana's soul was bound to Veronica's body. If Lucian struck too fiercely, he would kill Veronica along with her captor and lose any chance of extracting the spell. What he needed was soul magic, the art of separating Morgana's essence from Veronica's vessel without harming either of them. That meant studying at the renowned Merlin Academy, mastering its most forbidding discipline, soul separation. And while he was at it, he might as well learn the sister art, soul sealing. In Lucian's eyes, sealing magic would prove invaluable should he ever face an immortal or otherwise indestructible foe. The only problem was time. Lucian had never dabbled in soul magic before. These were the pinnacle of the Academy's curriculum. He would need months, perhaps years, to become proficient. But for now, urgency pressed him not. He didn't have to deploy these spells immediately. He could afford to be patient. With a determined nod, Lucian cast his gaze toward the distant spire, where Morgana remained confined. He already controlled the first element of his plan, overwhelming force. All that remained was to master the soul arts. Then, when the time came, he would free Morgana alone, bind her soul, and demand the resurrection spell on his own terms. Only by doing so could he ensure Veronica's safety and secure the power he sought. Lucian realized that by studying soul magic in the other worlds, particularly the fragmentary echoes left behind by his countless clones, he could accelerate his own mastery of these arcane arts. He recalled tales of Voldemort's black ritual, in which the Dark Lord split his soul to fashion Horcruxes. Of course, Lucian had no intention of following Voldemort's path to madness. He would never resort to murder or dark rituals simply to bind pieces of his essence to physical objects. Still, the theoretical underpinnings of Voldemort's magic were invaluable. In effect, Lucian's process of soul-splitting to generate his universe-spanning clones was strikingly similar. Each clone was functionally a Horcrux, anchoring a part of Lucian's soul so that as long as one remained intact, he could never truly die. By comparing notes with the soul fragments scattered across other realities, he hoped to refine his own techniques, and perhaps uncover entirely new applications of soul magic. Chapter 225, Superpower Academy Upgrade, Second Update, Marvel World, Superpower Academy. At last, the plasma electromagnetic cannon is finished. Lucian sank back in his chair, exhaling deeply. He'd survived on barely an hour of sleep each night for the past 5 days, pushing himself to the brink to perfect this weapon. Watching his panda clone fire off a flawless test shot, he finally allowed himself a moment of relief. Next up, upgrading the entire academy. Over those sleepless days, Lucian had sketched out a comprehensive plan to modernize the school's defenses and facilities, both magical and technological. On the magical front, his own powers had grown by leaps and bounds. He'd mastered several advanced spells, and with the new wand he'd forged from World Tree Heartwood, his casting was faster and far more precise. On the tech side, he had 2 geniuses at his disposal, Banner and Betty. Together, they would replace or retrofit the aging equipment left behind by the Beast. To be fair, many of those relics remained revolutionary, even by today's standards. The X-Fighter jets still outran most aircraft, and the combat simulation chamber had earned Tony Stark's praise as next-gen, but Lucian believed they could push boundaries even further. With the plasma electromagnetic cannon now online, the real work could begin. It was time to elevate Superpower Academy to a wholly new level of magical might and technological brilliance. Times move on, and outdated methods can often be replaced by superior innovations. Decades ago, Howard Stark had identified promising new elements but lacked the era's scientific infrastructure to synthesize them. In Tony Stark's time, however, producing those same elements has become routine. It's like having a blueprint for a computer while living in the Bronze Age. You simply don't have the surrounding technology to bring it to life. Similarly, Bruce Banner and Betty Ross may not rival Hank McCoy's, the Beast, raw inventiveness, but their combined expertise is more than sufficient to modernize the school's equipment. Lucian stepped out of his laboratory into the crisp morning air. Below him, the hallways buzzed with activity as students attended their first classes of the day. Over the past weeks, Professor Xavier had identified several children with extraordinary gifts and, with Lucian's blessing, welcomed them into the school. Slowly but steadily, the student body was growing. When Lucian reached the front gates, he gave a small gesture with his hand. The Muggle detection wards and protective enchantments shimmered and then vanished. Having chosen to apprentice under Albus Dumbledore, Lucian had mastered far more potent magic than simple concealment charms, magic that would safeguard the school's future. Lucian lifted his wand and called the incantation, Fidelius. A shimmering veil of light rippled across the academy's walls and courtyards, binding the ancient spell to every stone and spire. Unlike the simple Muggle repelling charm, which merely implants a subtle suggestion in non-magical minds, nudging ordinary people to glance away, the Fidelius charm rewrites the very rules of reality. No divination spell, no cutting-edge detection device, no amount of tenacious searching can pierce its concealment. Only the designated secret keeper can will the hidden location back into being. Satisfied that the school was now utterly off the map, Lucian straightened his robes and began the next enchantment. Unmappable, he intoned, weaving in a secondary ward that would ensure the castle couldn't even register on magical surveys or charts. With those 2 powerful charms in place, the academy would remain invisible to any prying eyes, mundane or magical, until Lucian decided otherwise. This is an exceptionally advanced enchantment, governed by strict, intricate rules. Its power lies in erasing a given location from every map on the planet, exactly the kind of magic Hogwarts employs to hide itself from Muggles and keep its students safe. Once Lucian had completed the 2 concealment spells, Mage, he unfurled his wings and soared into the air. Now he turned his full attention to restructuring the school's protective barrier, this time purely for defense. The first pair of spells had successfully hidden the school's existence, but if an all-out assault rained down on the surrounding area, that cloak would offer no protection. Lucian's new barrier would shield the castle itself from any indiscriminate attack. With the defensive wards in place, he flew down to the great courtyard before the castle. There stood hundreds of massive metal statues, arranged in precise rows. Each had been painstakingly forged by Tony from the finest magical alloys. Dragons reared up alongside 3-headed hellhounds, hydras, 9-tailed foxes, the noble Bai Zhe, and the fierce Kui. There were phoenixes, unicorns, the monstrous Taowu, and a host of other legendary beasts drawn from both Eastern and Western myth. Holding his wand aloft, Lucian moved slowly among these towering figures. With a whispered incantation, mimicry, he breathed life into metal and myth alike. One by one, the statues' eyes glowed, their joints creaked, and with a unified roar they awakened, ready to defend the school at a moment's notice. Lucian had long since mastered mimicry and transmutation magic, but even he couldn't simply copy a massive slab of metal and endow it with living power. That is, not without a dramatic boost. His salvation came in the form of a brand new wand, engineered to amplify its wielder's magic over 20-fold. With such a tool in hand, feats that once seemed impossible now lay well within his grasp. Still, amplification has its ceiling. No matter how extraordinary the materials, a shaft carved from world tree heartwood or strung with the nerve fiber of a frost giant king, the best wands in existence rarely exceed that 20 times threshold. If they could go much higher, those legendary artifacts would utterly eclipse the fairy tale wands by comparison. The reason isn't raw material alone, but the painstaking precision of wandcraft in the Harry Potter universe. Artisans there have honed their techniques for centuries, squeezing every ounce of magical potential from each core and stave. Even the finest ingredient can't compensate for a lack of technical mastery. It's like comparing a simple electric fan to a whole home air conditioning system. Both move air, but only one can truly cool a mansion. Ironically, as Lucian's personal reserves of mana swelled over time, he found himself relying less on his wand's boost. Power begets power, after all. And in the end, it was his own will and skill that proved the greatest force of all. It couldn't be real. He'd already broken past the Patriarch rank, mastered a spell capable of annihilating a planet, and still relied on a wand to boost his power by over 20-fold, far beyond any wand's designed limits. Without a revolutionary new wand technology, wands would soon be obsolete. The good news was that Lucian was no longer chained to his wand. Even his freshly opened clones, wandless, could wield his full strength. From now on, every world clone he created would possess equal power. Until today, his original Marvel World body topped the list thanks to its wand. The Fairy Tale World clone came in a close second. The Harry Potter and Sorcerer's Apprentice clones were about tied for third, and the new Misaka World clone lagged behind, wandless and underpowered. Lucian, your magic is extraordinary, far more fascinating than anything in our god realm, came a deep voice. Lucian barely had time to halt the swirling metal statues, which were poised to scatter and hide among the school's ruins, before he sensed someone behind him. He turned to find Thor, the god of thunder, holding an ancient tome titled War Elegy. Lucian settled into the training hall with a contented sigh. It had been several weeks since he'd arrived at Professor X's school, and every day now followed a familiar and welcome rhythm. Mornings were devoted to political theory lectures under Professor X's careful guidance. Afternoons, he and the others gathered to hear Steve regale them with stories of past battles. Evenings were reserved for roundtable discussions on world classics or screenings of war-themed films. Today, however, Lucian had stepped away from the classroom and into the sparring arena, where he'd summoned a half-dozen intricately detailed metal statuettes. With a casual flick of his wrist, they spun apart and clattered harmlessly to the edges of the room. He turned to Thor, who was watching intently. "So," Lucian asked with a grin, "how are you feeling? Have you managed to lift the hammer yet?" Thor's face lit up. He strode forward, every bit the stalwart Asgardian warrior. I've learned more than I ever expected, he said. I finally understand why the Allfather hesitated to reignite war. This morning, I grasped Mjolnir, and I felt it tremble in my hand. If nothing unexpected occurs, I should be able to raise it fully in the next few days, and with it, reclaim all my old strength. Lucian nodded, pleased. Around them, the school's other students paused in their own drills, sensing that something important was unfolding. In this place, where politics and philosophy met the legends of old, both warrior and mage were finding new paths forward. And for Lucian, watching his friend Thor inch closer to his full power was the best lesson of all. I'd be happy to help polish the chapter. Could you please provide the full text of the chapter you'd like rewritten? Once I have the complete version, I'll revise it into clear, idiomatic English with Lucian as the male protagonist. Thor's stormy blue eyes softened as he stood in the great hall, hammer in hand. As the god of thunder and the future lord of the divine realm, I bear the responsibility to protect humanity, he declared. Lucian offered him a warm smile. Whatever your reasons, you're more than welcome to stay here. With that, Lucian clapped Thor on the shoulder and made his way toward the school's basement workshop. He had a number of improvements in mind. First on the list was casting the Traceless extension charm to enlarge the battle simulation chamber, giving the students and himself ample room to train with superpowers and arcane spells. This was only the first phase. Once his alchemical mastery deepened, Lucian intended to overhaul the entire campus. He envisioned a school that combined the storied magic of Hogwarts Castle with the mobility of Fairy Tale's fortress. He'd inscribe powerful offensive magic circles across its battlements, and in time, he would even lift the entire structure off the ground, a floating citadel in the sky, impervious to any threat. Just as he was about to descend the spiral staircase into the basement, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Lucian paused, his mind racing with possibilities, both for the school's future and for the call that now demanded his attention. Lucian stared at the incoming caller ID, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow. He tapped the green button and grinned. Natasha, hey, what's up? Thinking of quitting S-Shield and enrolling at my school? On the other end, Natasha's voice came intense and breathless. Lucian, Director Fury is dead. S-Shield is finished. We need your help. Cold dread crept up his spine. Nick Fury is dead? Are you sure? Lucian knew Fury's reputation all too well. The man was almost impossible to kill. He had Skrull duplicates in reserve, and when things got dire, Carol Danvers herself was never far behind. Captain Marvel could tear through Kree dreadnoughts and Thanos warships with nothing but her bare hands and cosmic energy. If Fury had really fallen— Hydra, Natasha said, her voice cracking. They ambushed us with dozens of Winter Soldiers. Director Fury was with us. He took a shot straight through the chest. He died instantly. Lucian's heart pounded. He struggled to swallow past the lump in his throat. The last thing the world needed now was for S.Shield to collapse. Fury might have been one man, but his strategic brilliance held the entire agency together. Without him, chaos would spread like wildfire. Natasha, Lucian said, forcing calm into his tone, tell me exactly where you are. I'm on my way. He ended the call and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Fury's death felt unreal, too cruel, too sudden. But Black Widow wouldn't lie. Not about this. Clenching his jaw, Lucian grabbed his jacket and phone. There was work to do and a world to save. Lucian sank into the warped metal chair, the hollow display flickering with Hydra's grim legacy. The Winter Soldiers, he began, voice low, are weapons born of serum. Stripped of emotion, they live only to obey. We always assumed there was only one, but that was before tonight. He tapped a control pad, bringing up a schematic of a Mid-Atlantic Hydra facility. In the MCU timeline, there really was just one Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes. After the train crash, Hydra found him, pumped him full of experimental serum, and erased his mind. He became their deadliest operative, the one who killed Tony Stark's parents, and set off the Avengers' Civil War. But what if the coder we stumbled upon in this base was activated ahead of schedule? A bead of sweat rolled down Lucian's temple as he remembered reading Bucky's own debrief. Hydra didn't stop at one. They recruited their elite killing squad, 30-plus operatives, and turned them all into Winter Soldiers. The hologram zoomed in on archival footage of men and women encased in icy stasis pods, suspended like horrific statues. Helmut Zemo exposed them, frozen remnants of Hydra's ambition, when he collapsed that facility. According to Bucky, each of those 30 Winter Soldiers mastered over 30 languages, then used those skills for infiltration, assassination, disguise, even regime subversion. They struck without warning, vanished without a trace. Lucian shut off the display, the room falling into relative darkness. "If even half of those operatives ever wake up," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "we're looking at an army that could bring every world power to its knees." He stood, resolve hardening in his eyes. "We have to find them, before they find us." Lucian ended the call, his pulse racing. If Hydra reactivated those cryogenically frozen Winter Soldiers, the combined force could topple a small nation. But this wasn't the familiar cinematic universe. It was a darker, more unpredictable Marvel reality. Thanks to Lucian's tip-off, S.H.I.E.L.D. had learned of Hydra's infiltration early and launched a direct assault. Hydra expected the attack. They revived the Winters and struck back with devastating efficiency, catching Nick Fury off guard. It's entirely plausible Fury died in that first ambush. In countless other worlds, Fury, Iron Man, or even Captain America have already fallen. Here, Steve Rogers hung up his shield long ago and now teaches history at a university. Without his leadership, S.H.I.E.L.D. was never going to win this fight. After Fury died, did anything odd happen? Like, did his body turn green? Lucian asked, almost embarrassed by the question. Green? What are you talking about? Natasha's voice crackled over the line, tension clear in every syllable. Lucian, I'm not joking. S.H.I.E.L.D. has collapsed. Hydra's next move could endanger the entire world. They've seized one of our orbital carriers and are about to launch Project Insight. Natasha's words hit Lucian like a punch. Fury's death had shaken her to the core, and with S.H.I.E.L.D. compromised and Hydra spies hiding everywhere, the world was closer to disaster than ever before. Chapter 7. The Only Hope. Lucian sat alone in the dimly lit operations room, staring at the feed from S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ. The latest bulletin had just come in. Nick Fury was dead. The security officers on duty had checked the body twice. There was no sign of a Skrull shapeshift. Fury had fallen for real, and with Fury gone, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s defenses crumpled overnight. Hydra, once an insidious secret, had seized control from within. He tapped his comm, voice steady despite the storm of thoughts raging in his head. "Steve, where are you now? I'll meet you there." On the other end, Captain America's calm reply sounded like a lifeline. Steve Rogers was one of the few he could trust. Hydra's new weapon was called the Insight Plan. From what Lucian had pieced together, Dr. Zola's condensed algorithms and the analytical power of Cradle, Hydra's massive data mining AI, were combining to identify every mutant on the planet. Once they had names, locations, and power classifications, they'd neutralize or enslave each one before a resistance could form. Hydra wants total domination, Lucian muttered to himself. They're planning a global hegemony. He thought of the grim alternate realities he'd studied, universes where Hydra's rule was absolute, where free will had been stamped out in the name of security. Not on his watch. Lucian leaned back and recalled the one place still standing against Hydra's iron grip. His school. Hidden beneath the city's skyline, it was a sanctuary for mutants. Students with telepathy, super-strong brutes, elemental manipulators, and more. They'd trained together, fought side by side. Now it was up to them. He punched in a sequence on his terminal and activated the emergency beacon. Across the city, at that underground campus, alarms would sound. Lucian's voice, firm yet urgent, crackled over the comm network he'd rigged just for this moment. "Everyone, listen up. Hydra's Insight Plan is live, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is down. Fury's gone, but we're not beaten. Captain America's mobilizing. I need every mutant there at once, powers at the ready. Let's show them what it means to fight for freedom." He ended the transmission and surveyed the war room screens again. Odin would not intervene. The Ancient One would remain aloof. This was a conflict born of humanity's own hubris and betrayal. But Lucian had one advantage the gods didn't. He understood the promise and the peril of mutation. He believed in people like him. A final breath steadied him. "Hydra might have their algorithms and AI," he said softly. "But we have heart, we have each other, and we will not let Earth fall into their hands." He reached for his jacket, slung his comm gear over his shoulder, and strode into the corridor. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Zola's predictive algorithm had scoured every data stream, academic records, social networks, surveillance feeds, to plot the trajectories of every potential adversary. Its chilling conclusion: dozens of still obscure individuals would one day rise to threaten Hydra's iron grip. To nip these threats in the bud, Hydra dispatched 3 aerospace carriers bristling with high-altitude sniper drones, ordered to eliminate each target before they could grow powerful. With that strike force in place, Hydra issued a single, ruthless decree: absolute, unconditional obedience, or face instantaneous eradication. For Lucian and the students of the Superpower Academy, submission seemed the only path to survival. But Lucian refused to kneel. Yielding to Hydra's terror would only invite more tyranny. His plan was clear: infiltrate their operation, dismantle it from within, and show Hydra exactly who they dared to threaten. Chapter 27, Miraculous Healing Magic, Update 1. Natasha Romanoff peered at her handheld scanner, frustration darkening her voice. We're right next to Lucian's school, but there's no sign of it. I can't lock onto anything. She and her team had planned to reach the academy directly. Certain S.H.I.E.L.D.'s instruments would guide them. Yet when they arrived, the building simply wasn't there. Even S.H.I.E.L.D.'s sophisticated positioning system showed no trace of the school, nothing across the entire block, as if it had been wiped from every database. After circling the neighborhood twice to no avail, the injured agents reluctantly activated the comm unit they'd left behind. Moments later, Lucian's calm reply crackled over the line. I just reinforced the school's defense matrix. Stay where you are. I'll come to you. It dawned on Lucian that the same loyalty curse binding him to the academy must be cloaking it from all outside approaches. With resolve, he spread his wings and burst into the sky. Scanning the roadside from above, he spotted Natasha and her companions, bruised but waiting. Descending in a graceful sweep, he landed beside the injured widow. You're safe now, he said, his hands already glowing with the miraculous healing magic he'd mastered. Together, they prepared to return to the hidden sanctuary that had momentarily vanished, and now welcomed them home. Lucian stepped into the open courtyard and took in the scene. Agent Coulson, Nick Fury's right hand, Maria Hill, Melinda May, Clint Barton, Hawkeye himself, and Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, flanked by a dozen other S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives. Every one of them bore fresh bruises or bandages. Across from them stood more than 30 Winter soldiers, their silent formation testifying to the threat they posed, each as strong as Captain America under normal conditions. There are a lot of you, Lucian observed coolly. Natasha cut him a sharp look. Lucian, I know you'd rather keep out of this, but if Hydra's plan succeeds, the world will sink into chaos. She paused, letting her words settle. Help us now, and once S.H.I.E.L.D. is back on its feet, we'll make sure you're compensated, handsomely. He met her gaze, annoyance flickering in his dark eyes. He wasn't in this for noble causes. He needed a good reason to risk his skin. Natasha seemed to understand that perfectly. First, she said, we'll get you patched up at the school. Then you can tell us everything you know. Lucian gave a curt nod and led the others toward the school's gate. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but having S.H.I.E.L.D. in his debt might just be worth his time. Lucian had no mystical arts to master at S.H.I.E.L.D., and he certainly didn't dare dabble in the familiar magics of the Marvel Universe. Every spell there was born of a specific entity, each bound to a corresponding demon or god, and each demanding its own terrible price. Summon the crimson bands of Sidorak, and you're indebted to the demon god Sidorak. Wield the shield of Seraphim, and Seraphim himself holds your soul in contempt. Even the revered Emperor Weishan's sacred sword traces back to the Emperor god Weishan. That is why Lucian never approached the Ancient One for tutelage, nor did he commit fully to Kamartaj's teachings. He maintained an even greater distance from Master Wong, playfully dismissed by most students as that old salted fish, whose cryptic connections to eternity filled Lucian with wary respect. His plan was simple. One day, when his own power rivaled that of these dimensional deities, he would dissect their magic, decode its source, and rebuild it entirely on his own terms. No demonic pacts required. Still, Lucian couldn't help but be fascinated by Kamartaj's planet-spanning portals, which could send you to the farthest reaches of space in the blink of an eye. And if there was one artifact at S.H.I.E.L.D. he truly coveted above all others, It was the cosmic cube, a relic said to warp reality itself. For now, though, he would bide his time, sharpening his skills in the shadows, preparing for the day when he could claim power without paying someone else's price. As one of the 6 infinity stones born in the Big Bang, the Space Stone embodies the universe's most fundamental laws and raw power. Even weapons built from only a fraction of its energy can devastate entire battlefields. During World War II, Hydra scientists tapped its might to create particle beam rifles. Later, Kree engineers reverse-engineered the same power source to develop the lightspeed drive that transformed Carol Danvers into Captain Marvel. Now, imagine seizing the Space Stone and channeling its infinite energy into your own magic, an inexhaustible wellspring of power. "This is our school, Super Academy," Lucian announced. The moment he spoke, the sprawling campus shimmered into view before the astonished agents from S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow among them. In fact, the Academy hadn't appeared at all. It had always stood there, hidden by Lucian's secret enchantment, the Fidelity Charm. Only those who learn the school's location directly from him can perceive it. No map, no device, no whispered rumor will reveal Super Academy to anyone else. It lies beyond sight and reach, except for those Lucian chooses to invite. For example, imagine he tells a team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents where the school is. At first, they can see it just fine. But once they leave and try to bring others along, something strange happens. No matter what instructions they give, even if they physically lead newcomers right up to the gates, those newcomers simply can't see the school at all. That's the power of the Chidon loyalty spell, an enchantment remarkably like the Fidelius charm. It explains why Severus Snape, despite being a member of the Order of the Phoenix, wasn't its secret keeper and couldn't betray the Order's location to Voldemort. Snape's role as a spy was real enough, but it didn't grant him the authority to override the loyalty curse. Even if the true secret keeper is captured and tortured, unless he willingly divulges the secret, the protected place remains completely hidden. That's also why Sirius realized so quickly that Peter Pettigrew had turned traitor the moment Voldemort discovered and killed James and Lily Potter. "It's astonishing," Coulson muttered, pressing his hand against the wound in his arm. Blood seeped through his fingers, but he hardly noticed, so captivated was he by the spell's ruthless perfection. Lucian had pored over every dossier on the Super Academy, absorbing the classified briefings that Nick Fury and Black Widow had shared about its arcane curriculum, but nothing prepared him for the reality of its soaring spires and humming wards of magic. Standing in the grand entrance hall, he felt that familiar spark of wonder. Here, the impossible was routine. Most of the S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives he'd brought along had never heard of the Academy until Fury's untimely death. Only in recent weeks had Black Widow and a handful of senior agents negotiated clearance to escort them here, granting them a glimpse of the world beyond conventional science. Today, Lucian would give them more than a glimpse. He would demonstrate true wizardry. "Healed, as I promised," he said quietly. In the spacious conference room, Lucian paused long enough to lock eyes with each agent. Then, with a precise mental summons, he reached out psychically to Professor X. Classes were to be suspended immediately, and all teaching staff were to assemble here. Within minutes, the walls that usually bore chalked arcana symbols were lined with curious instructors, eager to observe what their gifted student could do. One by one, Lucian raised his hands over the wounded agents. Pale motes of azure energy drifted from his fingertips, swirling around lacerations and fractures like fireflies in a jar. Flesh knitted, bones realigned, and torn sinews fused in an impossible dance of restoration. Scars faded before the agents' astonished eyes until their skin was smooth and unbroken. The room fell into a hushed awe. These agents had endured months of grueling surgery and rehabilitation for injuries that now vanished in seconds without so much as a single stitch. They exchanged bewildered glances. No one had fully grasped that, to a competent wizard, even a severed limb could be coaxed back into place so long as both parts remained intact. When the last glow of healing magic dissipated, Lucian exhaled, satisfied. Black Widow stepped forward, her dark eyes shining with approval. "I knew the Academy was formidable," she admitted, "but this—" She let her voice trail off, leaving the room thick with unspoken marvel. As the agents tested their newly restored limbs, flexing fingers and bending knees in renewed wonder, Lucian allowed himself a small smile. He had shown them the true power hidden behind these ancient walls, and made it clear that magic's possibilities were far beyond anything they'd ever imagined. "It's not necessary to strip down. Medicines will absorb through your clothes," Lucian said gently. The agent hesitated, cheeks reddening. She let go of her shirt and smoothed it back into place as Lucian worked, cleaning and bandaging the wound on her chest. Around them, the other injured agents waited their turn in silence, each one too exhausted or too shaken to speak. Lucian moved swiftly from person to person, dabbing antiseptic and applying fresh gauze. The last agent stepped forward, and Lucian tied off the bandage with practiced fingers. He straightened and stepped back just as the door to the conference room swung open. Professor X entered, flanked by several faculty members. Behind them, the corridor's harsh lights cast long shadows over the row of makeshift cots. The headmaster's gaze swept across the wounded agents and rested on Lucian. "Explain yourselves," Professor X said evenly. "How did we end up with so many casualties? You assured us you had the upper hand." Lucian met the professor's steady stare. Around him, the other teachers watched with growing concern. He inhaled slowly, then addressed the room. "We were ambushed," he began. "We did hold them back at first, but they had backup we didn't anticipate. Their second wave came in under the radar, without warning." He glanced toward Black Widow, who stood just to his left. "Natasha," he prompted, "you saw their reinforcements arrive. Fill them in." Black Widow nodded and stepped forward, her expression grim. Lucian fell silent, his eyes on her face, as she prepared to recount every critical detail. Chapter 228, The Insight Plan, Second Update. Black Widow entered the makeshift briefing room, her face drawn with exhaustion. She met Lucian's eyes and began without preamble. "Because of your intel, we struck first, tracked Hydra's movements, and even located their leader, Pierce. But they'd already stolen the cosmic cube months ago and used its power to reverse engineer energy weapons. We never saw that coming. Overwhelmed, we were forced to abandon the Triskelion and fall back to a safe house. We thought we'd bought ourselves time until Hydra's winter soldiers found us. They hit that safe house with brutal precision. We suffered massive casualties, and Director Fury was killed. Only a handful of us escaped. That's why we came to you, Lucian. We need your help." Natasha paused, tapping her tablet. A three-dimensional map of the planet, overlaid with orbital trajectories, hovered in midair. "This is Hydra's so-called Insight Plan. Pierce convinced Fury to launch 3 orbital carriers under the guise of a global crime prevention initiative. The pitch was flawless, high-altitude platforms that monitor every inch of Earth, neutralizing threats before they can act. The truth, though, is far darker. Hydra used Dr. Zola's algorithm to identify anyone who might ever oppose them, heroes, leaders, even ordinary citizens with suspicious profiles. Once the carriers are in place, they won't just watch the world. They'll strike, executing targets the algorithm flags as future threats." Lucian stared at the rotating carriers, each bristling with weapon arrays. The realization settled in. Hydra wouldn't merely control crime, they'd control the very fate of humanity. And unless they stopped this plan, there'd be no safe place left on Earth. Lucian sketched the outline of Hydra's next phase. Deploy orbital carriers to strike down any nation bold enough to resist, then bring every corner of the globe under Hydra's banner. Before he could go into the technical details, Steve Rogers, Captain America, shook his head in exasperation. "You really shouldn't have dredged that thing up from the sea," Steve said quietly. Lucian's jaw tightened. He still remembered how the Red Skull had used the cosmic cube to swell Hydra's ranks and arm their every soldier with devastating power. That artifact had been the catalyst for the world's descent into chaos, and Steve had seen its effects firsthand. "Captain, you're right," Lucian admitted. "If Director Fury hadn't insisted on reverse engineering cosmic energies to build new weapons, Hydra would never have had the chance to seize the cube in the first place." Agent Phil Coulson nodded vigorously as he listened. Steve was his idol, and Coulson had always been uneasy with Fury's more radical experiments. "Fury meant well," Coulson said, "but his eagerness to push the envelope left us flat-footed." "Exactly," Lucian agreed. "It wasn't the vision that failed, it was our timing. we were simply one step behind. If we could get our energy weapons online first, we'd be in the clear, and maybe the director would still be alive, John said through gritted teeth, his face a mask of grief and anger. Agent Phil Coulson let out a heavy sigh. John, I know how much you cared about Director Fury, but we can't change the past. Right now, our priority is stopping Hydra's Insight project. Arguing over what might have been won't help us. John's shoulders slumped. He was one of Coulson's oldest friends in S.H.I.E.L.D. They'd both answered Fury's call countless times. The pain in John's eyes mirrored Coulson's own sorrow, but Coulson pressed on. By the way, he said, turning to the dozen agents assembled in the war room, I haven't even asked your names yet. Let's start introductions. Lucian, who had joined the agency only weeks ago, caught his breath when he heard John. It was the name of someone from his past, and for a moment his heart froze. Then he offered a polite smile and stepped forward, ready to introduce himself, just as John began. Lieutenant John Walker, reporting for duty, the middle-aged D-agent announced, his voice steady despite the tension. One by one, the others followed, each stating rank and specialty. When it came to Lucian's turn, he squared his shoulders, met Coulson's gaze, and said, Lucian Pierce, tactical analyst. Coulson nodded. Welcome aboard, Director Pierce. We're glad to have you with us. As the last names were recorded, the room fell into a determined silence. Fury's death was a wound none of them would soon forget. But now, more than ever, they had to pull together. Hydra was moving fast, and Insight threatened everything S.H.I.E.L.D. stood for. With their team assembled, Coulson tapped the screen to bring up the latest satellite images. All right, he said, voice firm. Let's see what we're up against. Lucian listened as the names were called off one by one. John Garrett, Grant Ward, Gemma Simmons, Leo Fitz, Alfonso Mackenzie, Barbara Morse. A solid lineup, no wonder you got ambushed. Looks like Hydra agents slipped in among them. At the mention of Garrett and Ward, a thin smile curved Lucian's lips. He wasn't certain about the others, but John Garrett and his protege, Grant Ward, were notorious Hydra operatives. Their display of grief over Nick Fury's death had been nothing but theater. Had Lucian not recognized the telltale signs of practiced acting, he might have been taken in himself. Then again, top-level spies were trained for exactly this sort of performance. Lucian, Professor X's calm voice echoed in his mind. A unit is approaching the school. They match the description of the Winter Soldiers. With a gentle touch to his temple, Xavier beamed Lucian a mental image, a squad of heavily armed soldiers, their uniforms bearing the Hydra emblem, moving with preternatural speed and precision. They patrolled just beyond the perimeter of the grounds, the Fidelius curse preventing them from crossing the invisible barrier. Lucian's jaw clenched. Hydra might not breach the wards, but they would test them. And if Garrett and Ward were inside the walls, hidden among friends, trouble was already unfolding. He straightened, ready to warn his allies. The real battle was only just beginning. In the dimly lit operations bunker beneath the Triskelion, the remaining S.H.I.E.L.D. agents gathered around Natasha Romanoff as she delivered her report. It appears we've got at least 2 Hydra spies, possibly more, tailing us ever since the breach, she said, her voice low but urgent. Across the room, Lucian's face remained calm. He listened without a hint of surprise, as though Natasha were merely stating the weather. When she pressed on, however, even his composure flickered. Lucian, there's no time to waste, she continued. Hydra has seized the Triskelions' main command deck and taken control of 3 aerospace carriers. They could launch at any moment. Once they're airborne, we'll never bring them down. Natasha glanced at Director Hill, Agent Coulson, and the others. They looked gaunt and shaken, every one of them afraid to press Lucian for an immediate response. He was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s strategic genius, and no one wanted to be the first to snap him out of his calm. He folded his arms and nodded thoughtfully. You're right, he said at last. But before we worry about those carriers, we have traitors in our midst. If we don't root them out first, nothing we do afterward will matter. A tense silence fell over the room. Then Lucian offered a half-smile and swept his gaze over the assembled agents. Finally, he fixed on Garrett. Let's begin with you, Mr. Garrett, he said, voice steady. We'll deal with the rest one by one. It was a simple declaration, but in that moment, everyone knew exactly what it meant. Lucian had a plan. and he intended to execute it flawlessly. Traders first, then the carriers. With that, he turned on his heel and strode toward the secure interrogation chamber, his confidence undimmed by world-ending odds. Chapter 10. The sky is not our limit. Lucian stood at the edge of the Academy's observation deck, gazing out over Manhattan's glittering lights. Above the city, 3 massive aerospace carriers hung in geosynchronous orbit, each one a testament to human ambition and the latest threat Hydra and S-Shield had identified. Their analysts insisted the fleet numbered in the thousands, engineered to strike with devastating precision and tip the balance of power on Earth. Lucian allowed himself a faint, wry smile. Under his command, the Academy's defense grid was formidable. Their anti-ballistic shields could intercept anything short of a tactical nuclear warhead aimed straight at New York City. Beyond that, casualties would become political rather than personal concerns, and not his problem to solve. He tapped the hollow dial on his wrist. Hydra's doomsday dossier claimed 10,000 carriers. Lucian's intelligence confirmed only 3. The operatives who patched through satellite feeds and black market transponders had already accounted for them. If anyone thought Earth's superhuman community would fold in the face of orbital bombardment, they'd vastly underestimated their resilience. What about the hidden Eternals? Would they merely kneel and pray while sky ships unleashed fire upon them? Not a chance. The 10 Rings had cells buried deep in every continent, all ready to mobilize. Ghost Rider's chain flame would carve an inferno through steel hulls if provoked. And Doctor Strange, marked for elimination to cripple Earth's magical defenses, was under the Ancient One's strict guardianship. The Old One had never allowed her most promising pupil to face harm unprepared. If the carriers actually launched their assault, Lucian thought, the world's frontline heroes would swarm them faster than Hydra could say, apocalypse. By the time any stray missiles reached Academy airspace, they'd be fragments scattered across the Atlantic. Lucian himself might never have to fire a shot. He straightened, folding his arms behind his back. A new plan took shape in his mind. This crisis, this convergence of secret fleets and covert agendas, was the perfect catalyst. It would force the Superpower Academy out of the shadows onto the global stage. Under Lucian's leadership, they wouldn't just defend humanity, they'd earn its trust. The carriers above might believe they held all the power. Lucian knew better. Earth's greatest weapons weren't hidden in orbit, they stood ready on the ground, and soon enough the world would see them in full light. With a decisive nod, Lucian turned from the window and strode back toward the command center. The hour of revelation had come, and the Academy was ready. Though the Superpower Academy's headquarters must remain hidden, its graduates will one day join the wider world. And they cannot stay concealed forever. That means the Academy itself must step into the light, making its existence known to both the public and the governments of every nation. To that end, we'll let Hydra's machinations grow ever bolder, fueling enough global crises that no government can manage on its own. Once the world teeters on the brink of chaos, the Superpower Academy will intervene. By resolving the very threats that have overwhelmed international authorities, the Academy will demonstrate its unrivaled strength and ensure every nation understands exactly why it was created. In this way, when Lucian and his fellow students finally go public, they will do so not as unseen prodigies, but as a force the world cannot ignore. Chapter 229, The Hidden Spy, Third Update. Lucian met their eyes coolly. Soon you'll be forced to sign the Sokovia Accords, just like the Avengers. Refuse, and you'll be declared international fugitives. He paused, recalling his own arrogance, convinced that without the Avengers, every national army could handle any threat. Reality had proven otherwise. When the Infinity Stones finally arrived on Earth in Infinity War, Secretary Ross still pursued Captain America. Now Hydra is deliberately undermining every government's faith in its champions, all to elevate the Superpower Academy's standing. They have no need to hurry. Garrett sprang to his feet, fury bright in his eyes. Traitor? You're calling us traitors? We've bled for S-Shield and for the world, time and time again, standing on the brink of death to protect people. You dare insult us like that? With a metallic snikt, Wolverine Logan's adamantium claws slid free. He leveled a vicious glare at Garrett. Watch your tone when you're talking to our principal, bub. or I won't hesitate to add a little color to your day." Tension crackled across the room as heroes and agents alike braced for what came next. The game of shadows was only just beginning, and Hydra's hidden hand had yet to reveal its full intentions. "I suggest you retract your claws." Agent Ward, standing beside Garrett, whipped out his sidearm and leveled it at Logan. Logan only sneered. "Kid, your little toy can't touch me." "Hold on, Grant. Lower your weapon." Coulson rose swiftly, sensing the tension spiking in the room. Lucian gave a faint, assured smile. "Coulson, Natasha, we trust you implicitly, but for everyone else—" He paused, letting his gaze sweep the assembled agents. "If we don't test them first, how can we be certain there isn't a Hydra spy in our midst? Think about it. Isn't it odd that an entire unit of Winter soldiers knew exactly where our safe house was and hid it before we even got wind of the ambush?" Black Widow pushed herself to her feet. "Lucian's right. We need to be sure." Hawkeye, by her side, gave a curt nod. Natasha's keen instincts had already told her something was off. Only a traitor could have betrayed their location so precisely. But until now, she'd held back. Lucian's eyes glowed with quiet confidence. His telepathic gift, coupled with Professor Xavier's unrivaled expertise, would root out any Hydra agents among them. That test, he knew, would settle everything once and for all. Coulson let out a slow breath, glancing between Logan and the rest of the team. Finally, he holstered his weapon. "All right, let's do this." Carefully, as the room braced itself for Lucian's mind probe, everyone steeled for the truth to come to light. It was exactly for this reason that Natasha raced straight to Lucian the moment she slipped free of Hydra's pursuit. They couldn't take another step until they were absolutely sure no Hydra agents remained among them. Nick Fury may be dead, but he'd left behind plenty of contingency plans and resources so long as the team was loyal. "Natasha, are you serious?" Garrett exclaimed, staring at her in disbelief. "You know how many classified files each of us carries in our heads. Who's to say Lucian won't sift through our memories during that scan? He could even tamper with them. I'm not handing over my mind to anyone." His outburst spread like wildfire among the other agents. Even those certain of their own loyalty recoiled at the idea of a full memory sweep. It felt far more invasive than stripping naked for inspection. A man's private browsing history, or a woman's personal messages, might feel embarrassing if revealed, but memories? Having someone peer into your most intimate thoughts was a violation in every sense. "Coulson, what are you saying?" Garrett's voice was low, but edged with steel. Phil Coulson glanced at him, hesitated, then nodded. "Garrett, we have no choice. Fury is gone, and no SHIELD secret is worth hiding right now. I trust Lucian, and I need you to trust him too. This is merely a verification, just a test." Garrett folded his arms, eyes narrowing. He and Coulson had been through fire together. His concerns weren't without merit. Yet with Hydra's shadow deepening, they needed absolute certainty that no sleeper agents lurked among them. Only then could they press on, and they desperately needed Lucian's abilities and the resources of the Superpower Academy on their side. "Natasha and I will undergo the same screening," Coulson added, meeting Garrett's gaze. "Everyone who stays will be tested, no exceptions." Agent Hill stood as well. Around the conference table sat the last senior operatives of SHIELD, Coulson, Natasha Romanoff, Clint Barton, Maria Hill, and Garrett. 4 of the 5 nodded in agreement, sealing the plan. Garrett snorted. "I don't buy it. If you want to test yourselves, fine. But I'm not letting some newcomer rifle through my mind. I'm out of here. If you want to beat Hydra, you do it without me. Anyone brave enough to join me?" He pushed back his chair and strode toward the door, spine rigid with defiance. The room fell silent as the door swung shut behind him. Lucian met Coulson's eyes, determination flashing in both their gazes. The test would begin, and the fate of SHIELD would hang in the balance. "Let's get out of here before they brand us as traitors." "I'm coming with you," Grant said without hesitation. "I refuse to leave my fate in the hands of strangers." Behind Garrett, another agent nodded in agreement. "John, this isn't the moment for theatrics. Trust me." Coulson shifted uneasily before John. In one fluid motion, John drew a pistol and pressed it into Coulson's hand. "You have 2 choices," he said quietly. "Shoot me now or set me free. I trust you, but I don't trust these outsiders." Both John and Garrett wore hidden trackers, a beacon for Hydra's winter soldiers. If they slipped out of the school and linked up with their hunters, they'd bring down the entire group in one swift move. Hydra had even left a gap in the safe house on purpose, letting Black Widow and the others escape so they could follow those leads to bigger prizes. It was a calculated risk with potentially devastating results, capturing or eliminating powerful mutants. "Clever," Coulson said, holding the gun by its barrel to keep it pointed at the floor. "But I'm sorry. I can't let any of you go." Lucian stepped forward and offered a slow, appreciative clap. "Bravo, Garrett. You really sold it." Tension crackled in the air as the group realized the real game had only just begun. Lucian's brow tightened. "He's joined up with Hydra? What are you saying?" Gatler turned, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. Lucian met Banner's eyes. "Show us," he ordered. Bruce Banner's fingers danced over the console, and a wall-mounted screen sprang to life. Dozens of figures in black tactical gear, Hydra's winter soldiers, moved silently along the Academy's outer wall. From the vantage point of the guards posted outside, there was nothing to see, but the high-definition surveillance feed told a very different story. Natasha Romanoff, Clint Barton, and Sam Wilson all recognized the intruders at once. These were the same winter soldiers who'd ambushed them in the safe house. Natasha's voice was cold as ice. "Someone inside has betrayed us. They've told Hydra exactly where we are." Clint let out a low curse. "They're not just scouting us. They're coming in to extract their agents." Thor, who had been leaning casually against the doorframe, pushed himself upright and strode into the room. His heavy footsteps echoed on the conference room floor. "Then we will not let them leave," he declared, Hammer already at his side. "Secrets in our midst or not, we stand as one." Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by the distant hum of the winter soldiers advancing. Lucian drew a breath. "All right, let's find that traitor, and make sure this place stays ours." Chapter 230, Abnormal Hydra, Update 1. Garrett's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Don't you move." In one swift motion, he snatched back the pistol he'd just pressed into Lucian's hand and trained the barrel on Agent Coulson's temple. Beside him, Grant, Garrett's eager apprentice, slammed a gun against Gemma Simmons's head. "Back away," Garrett ordered. "Let us through the door, and no one gets hurt." Coulson's eyes flicked between Lucian and Simmons. He understood that if S.H.I.E.L.D.'s mind-reading protocols were brought to bear on these two, Garrett's cover would be blown in an instant. They had to leave the Academy grounds now, before anyone could react. Lucian's heart hammered in his chest. He'd believed Garrett was on their side, but now he realized with dawning horror that the man he'd trusted was a Hydra sleeper agent. He glanced at Simmons, whose wide eyes met his for only a second before she was forced to turn away. "John," Lucian hissed, stepping forward despite the gun at his side. "You leaked the safe house coordinates. You murdered Fury. You're a traitor." Garrett's lips curved into a cold smile. "Still naive as ever, Agent Coulson. You really didn't see this coming, did you?" Coulson's jaw clenched. Betrayal cut deeper when it came from someone you'd fought beside for years. "You and Grant will answer for this," he said, voice low but unshaken. Garrett raised his pistol higher. "I'd rather answer to Hydra. Now move, or both of them die." Lucian's blood ran cold. With Simmons and Coulson at gunpoint, retreat was the only option. But he swore to himself, this night wouldn't mark the end of their fight. Not if he could help it. "I don't want to betray you any more than you want me to," Garrett said, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "You know what happened on that last mission. I suffered critical organ damage. The med team says I don't have long to live. Fury refused to authorize experimental treatment. But then Hydra reached out, promising not only to heal me, but to rebuild me into the strongest, most perfect soldier. All I want is a chance to survive." Phil Coulson's jaw tightened. It was true that S.H.I.E.L.D. had paused on Garrett's radical procedures. Fury deemed the technology too unstable, the side effects too unpredictable. But Hydra's aid was nothing more than a leash. "Fury isn't abandoning you," Coulson said through clenched teeth. "He's protecting you from a transformation that could destroy your mind. Don't believe Hydra's lies. They'll turn you into a weapon, a mindless killer like those winter soldiers roaming the globe." Garrett's lips curled into a mirthless smile. "Let them try. I'm not naive. Hydra wants to use me, but I'll use them first. I won't be their puppet. I'll become the ultimate human, perfect in body and mind. From there, I'll help lead the new generation of rulers." With that, Garrett glanced at Grant and gave a curt nod. The two men pivoted and strode toward the conference room door, leaving Coulson standing in the silent, humming light, unable to stop the choice that had just been made. Lucian's eyes narrowed. The instant the mercenaries raised their weapons, their guns froze midair. Under his silent command, the metal frames twisted and groaned, barrels bent, triggers snapped off, and what remained collapsed into useless scraps. "Coulson," Lucian called over his shoulder, voice calm. "They only expected me to guide bullets. They had no idea I could wrest the guns right out of their hands." Phil Coulson gave a low whistle of approval. "Thought you were limited to trajectory tricks. Good play." In the mercenary's moment of shock, Coulson lunged at Garrett. He slammed an elbow into the man's gut, then flowed through a rapid, precise series of strikes, nothing on par with Black Widow or Hawkeye, but more than enough. Garrett, already weakened by failing organs, crumpled to the ground. Lucian folded his arms, watching the mercenary writhe in pain. "Well, I forgot to mention my powers have been growing," he said, a faint edge of pride in his tone. Coulson knelt beside Garrett, checking that the threat was neutralized. He looked up at Lucian, cracking a grin. "Understated as ever." Lucian stepped forward and picked up a twisted fragment of the gun barrel. Until recently, he could only move hefty objects, car engines, steel beams, enough to curve a bullet mid-flight. But harnessing this level of precision on a fraction of that weight, he felt a thrill of possibility. How far could he push this new skill? The answer lay in the battles yet to come. Lucian's new clone-enhanced powers had come online faster than anyone expected. Now, with Misaka's cloning ability fueling his augmented strength, he could effortlessly lift 10 tons, and any conventional firearm looked like a flimsy toy in his hands. He crushed the pistol barrel between thumb and forefinger, flinging the mangled steel onto the conference room floor. "Boy," he rumbled, stepping closer, "if you're planning to run, I might as well have a little fun first." Across the room, Grant's eyes widened in alarm. The best agent S.H.I.E.L.D. had ever produced, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with May herself and usually take on a squad of 10 enforcers single-handed, realized there was no saving Gemma. He pivoted and sprinted for the heavy doors of the conference chamber. But Thor was already there, arms crossed, blocking the way. The Thunder God's battered armor and his famously massive frame were enough to make most agents hesitate, even without his fully restored divine power. "Get out of my way," Grant growled. He flipped out a dagger and lunged, aiming for Thor's heart. In any normal fight, a single well-placed strike might have been enough. But Thor was no ordinary man. Even in his weakened state, his reflexes and resilience outmatched any mortals. Thor leaned back like a prizefighter slipping a punch. "You're not nearly as skilled with that blade as my brother," he said coolly. In one fluid motion, Thor caught Grant's wrist, twisted, and sent him sprawling into the wall. The dagger clattered to the marble floor. Grant crumpled at Thor's feet, winded and defeated, as Lucian strode forward, every inch the unstoppable force he'd become. "Quickly! Secure them!" Lucian swept his hand through the air, unleashing 2 glowing rope spells that wound tightly around Garrett and Grant. With another gesture, he closed his eyes, channeling a soul-reading incantation through his telepathic gift to sift their memories. Moments later, he lowered his hand, his brow furrowing. "Hydra's power in this world is no small thing," he murmured. "It's clear why Nick Fury was defeated." The fragments he extracted from his captives with Sad minds painted a far more formidable Hydra than any he'd encountered in films or television. Perhaps alternate universes explained the discrepancies, but here, Hydra was no mere branching terrorist cell. In the movies, they'd splintered into numerous factions, each led by its own commander, and the World War II division under the Red Skull was only one of them. The true Hydra, Lucian discovered, had existed for 14 centuries. Born not on Earth, but as a Kree-engineered legion, it was conceived to produce super soldiers for interstellar warfare. The Kree had covertly experimented on dozens of primitive worlds, Earth among them, mutating humans to create the Inhumans, beings whose extraordinary powers were the unintended legacy of those clandestine trials. Long ago, the very first Inhuman, known as Hive, wielded the power to bend every Inhuman to his will. Under his command, they rose up against the Kree Empire, driving the alien oppressors from Earth. In response, the Kree shut down their illicit transformation program, destroying the facilities that had created Hive and his kind. But fear of Hive's mind control soon consumed the Inhumans who remained behind. They launched a second rebellion, using the Kree's black stone portal to cast Hive out to the far reaches of the cosmos. On Earth, a secretive band of human devotees, obsessed with Hive's promise of power, formed the organization known as Hydra. Over generations, they've sent agents through that same black stone portal in a relentless effort to rescue Hive and restore his dominion over humanity. Yet in Lucian's world, Hydra's origins don't quite match that legend. There's no definitive proof that Hydra sprang from the Inhumans, and Garrett and Grant may not even be aware of such whispered histories. Lucian, however, is convinced the tale has been distorted. In Garrett's own memories, the Hive within Hydra isn't an ancient Inhuman at all, but merely one of their agents, a dying man whose terminal illness granted him the code name Hive. Lucian had been captured by Hydra's Baron von Strucker and forcibly merged with a swarm of parasitic organisms, an abominable experiment that left both man and monster reborn. This Baron Strucker bears little resemblance to the cinematic version who wielded the Mind Scepter to create the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. In the films, his own strength was so limited that Captain America could felled him with a single blow. But in this world, Strucker's power has reached terrifying new heights. Chapter 2 and 31, The Disappearance of Captain Marvel, Second Update. Lucian sat back and replayed Garrett's decrypted memory files. What emerged was a far more sinister portrait of Hydra's leadership than any intelligence briefing had ever suggested. According to the recovered records, Baron Wolfgang von Strucker first rose to prominence during World War II as a peerless swordsman and sharpshooter. His prowess on the battlefield rivaled, even threatened, that of the Red Skull himself. Yet Strucker's life was cut short by a freak spore bomb explosion. He should have died that day, but Hydra's most fanatical scientists refused to accept defeat. Through a brutal regimen of genetic engineering and biochemical enhancement, they resurrected Strucker in a body stronger and more resilient than any human form. Empowered by their experiments, Strucker devoted the decades that followed to expanding Hydra's roster of superhuman operatives. He captured metahumans, unlocked hidden potential in loyal agents, and assembled an elite cadre of enhanced soldiers whose abilities turned them into living weapons. Strucker was hardly Hydra's only colossus. Alongside him and the enigmatic Hive operated Madame Hydra, better known by her codename Viper, a merciless tactician with venomous blades and darker ambitions. Then there was Baron Heinrich Zemo, not to be confused with the Sokovian colonel of modern lore. This Zemo was one of Hydra's original warlords, a contemporary of Strucker and the Red Skull, commanding fear and loyalty in equal measure. Behind these formidable figures stood Hydra's twisted scientific triumvirate, Arnim Zola, Baroness Lister, and Dr. Faust. Each had earned a reputation for inhuman experimentation and lethal ingenuity. Zola's trajectory, in particular, diverged sharply from the popular mythos. While official records claim he died of natural causes in 1972 and that S.H. Shield secured his consciousness in a New Jersey supercomputer, Hydra's archives paint a different picture. They describe a secret stronghold where Zola's mind, encoded and amplified, continues to design bioweapons and engineer monstrosities for Hydra's endless war. As Lucian reviewed every detail, the rivalries, the resurrections, the scientific abominations, he understood the true scale of the threat. Hydra was no mere clandestine cabal. It was an immortal engine of destruction, powered by the undead, the enhanced, and the digitally eternal. And now, with Captain Marvel gone missing, Hydra's shadow seemed poised to fall across the entire planet. Lucian's eyes narrowed as he pieced it all together. In this reality, Arnim Zola hadn't just hidden behind the walls of Hydra's labs. He'd transferred his mind into a robotic body, roaming free to advance his twisted research. Garrett had seen it too, and it was his shock at Zola's new form and his meeting with Zora that had cemented his loyalty to Hydra. In Garrett's mind, only Hydra could deliver the same upgrade for him. Black Widow watched Lucian silently for a moment. The Hydra here was far more dangerous than any he'd faced before, but to Lucian, even this formidable version posed little real threat. He turned back to Natasha and asked, "So, what do you think?" She hesitated. Lucian gave her a reassuring nod. "They were Hydra plants all along," he said evenly. "That's why they funneled intelligence back to their handlers and set the ambush against you." He paused, brow furrowing. "They only remember those two as Hydra operatives. Just to be safe, I should double-check your memories." "Go ahead," Agent Coulson said, stepping forward without a trace of apprehension. "Start with me." Lucian wasted no time. He reached out with a surge of telepathy, legilimency really, and sifted through Coulson's mind in seconds. The agent's past was simple: a childhood steeped in comic books, a lifelong admiration for Captain America, and an unwavering faith in heroes. Satisfied, Lucian drew back, ready to move on to the others, confident that nothing would slip past him this time. Lucian had begun his career in the Army Ran, GERS, before transferring into S.H.I.E.L.D., where he'd been at Nick Fury's side ever since. But today, an all-too-simple truth gnawed at him. There was no Captain Marvel. He'd combed through Agent Coulson's memories, every file, every fragment of recollection. Yet Captain Marvel and the Skrulls were nowhere to be found. By all accounts from the films and briefings, the young Coulson should have crossed paths with both. Even a fleeting encounter should have left some trace. Lucian pressed his palm to his forehead in frustration. Was it possible this universe simply didn't have a Captain Marvel? Not every reality adhered strictly to the cinematic continuity. Reluctant as he was to admit it, there might be worlds without certain heroes. Fury had never deployed a Skrull double for himself here, not because of a mission gone awry, but because Skrulls apparently didn't exist in this branch of reality. And the BB machine, the device Fury used to summon Captain Marvel, was nowhere to be found either. Lucian exhaled. The multiverse was proving to be more tangled than he'd ever imagined, and that uncertainty unsettled him. It wasn't just the missing powerhouse of Captain Marvel, it was the unknown strength of their enemies. If Hydra were to rise, or if Thanos ever turned his gaze this way, they would stand without one of their most formidable allies. And Lucian, who had always thrived on clear objectives and reliable backup, found himself standing on shifting ground. He closed Coulson's memory archive and looked across the briefing room at Fury's unguarded expression. Whatever lay ahead, Lucian realized, they would have to face it without the hero they had counted on. Lucian frowned as he weighed the implications. This universe wasn't unfolding the way the movies had. Every assumption he'd made based on the film's storyline now risked being catastrophically wrong. He'd believed himself strong enough already, and certain that, with a little more training, he could face down Thanos and his cosmic army without breaking a sweat. But that confidence felt naive now. He'd never read the comics, and knew nothing of their wider lore. If the coming threat wasn't the Thanos wielding the Infinity Stones, but the one empowered by the heart of the universe, Lucian realized he'd be hopelessly outmatched. "We can't let ourselves get complacent," he muttered under his breath. A knot formed in his chest as determination surged through him. He had to push his power even further. First, though, he needed to be sure his allies were where they claimed to be. After shadowing Agent Coulson for a time, Lucian reached out with his mental gift, scanning the memories of Black Widow and the others. Each mind he touched was resolutely loyal to S.H.I.E.L.D. Not a single Hydra spy lurked among them. The cold truth settled in. Nick Fury was gone for good. Lucian had held out hope that the legendary director might somehow return, but the evidence was irrefutable. Fury's resurrection was impossible. With that final piece knotted away, Lucian squared his shoulders. Whatever came next, he would be ready. After the Captain Marvel incident, Nick Fury came into possession of Kree blood and used it to develop GH325, a serum capable of restoring life, though its side effects can be devastating. Agent Coulson was put in charge of the program. In fact, it was GH325 that brought Phil Coulson himself back from death. But now, with no Captain Marvel to retrieve more Kree samples, the formula is irretrievably lost. Death, it seems, is truly final, and perhaps that's not a bad thing for Lucian. Fury's obsession with control has only tightened his grip on every operation. His intentions may be noble, but his methods make him a lightning rod for criticism. If anyone should lead S.H.I.E.L.D.'s efforts, it shouldn't be him, or even Coulson. They need someone more capable, someone who isn't constantly overruled by Fury's paranoia. Lucian, incoming. Professor Xavier's telepathic vision flooded Lucian's mind. Shield combat helicopters, their rotors churning the night sky, bore Dow, N on the campus. Sleek, armored Hydra troopers, rifles crackling with energy, repelled from the undercarriages. Garrett and Grant had gone silent, unable to send updates, and the Winter Soldier's trackers showed no trace of the missing Black Widow and her team. Lucian braced himself. The assault had begun. Hydra no longer hid in the shadows. They'd launched a full-scale assault. Through the conference room's monitors, Lucian watched in horror as row after row of tanks rumbled forward under Hydra banners, while combat helicopters sliced the sky and battalions of red-clad soldiers fanned out across the city. Then the speakers crackled to life with Garrett's cold voice. Agents of S.I.L.D., your organization has fallen from within. Alexander Pierce answers only to Hydra now. Resistance is futile. Garrett's face appeared on the screen, framed by the glare of floodlights. He leaned forward, lips curling into a smirk. Phil Coulson, I suggest you accept reality. Hydra outmatches you at every turn. Join us, and with my recommendation, you'll rise far above your current rank. When we reshape the world, I'll install you as ruler of your very own country, no questions asked. Phil Coulson's jaw tightened. He glanced at the digital map projected on the table, then met Lucian's eyes. Lucian felt his pulse quicken. He'd enlisted in S.H.I.E.L.D., inspired by Captain America's unwavering ideals, truth, justice, protection of the innocent. Now Hydra threatened to snuff those ideals out. Coulson turned to Clint Barton. Clint, that electro arrow, do you still have it? I need it now. On the screen behind Garrett, classified footage played, Hydra scientists forcing helpless agents to convulse, foam at their lips, victims of some new biochemical terror weapon. Lucian's stomach nodded. Hold on, Lucian said, stepping forward. We won't let them win. Coulson nodded. Then let's show Hydra what S.H.I.E.L.D. really stands for. As the room plunged into tense preparation, Lucian steeled himself. Hydra might control S.H.I.E.L.D.'s highest ranks, but they'd never break the spirit of those who stood for something greater. And Lucian would fight to the last breath to prove it. Chapter 232, Thunder Strikes Hydra. Part 3. Sorry, I used it up in the last battle. Hawkeye spread his hands in apology, and Coulson let out a disappointed sigh. When Garrett's attempts to persuade Coulson clearly failed, he shifted his gaze to Lucian, the most powerful voice in the room. Convince Lucian, Garrett knew, and the rest wouldn't matter. Mr. Lucian, Garrett began smoothly, Hydra harbors no ill will toward mutants. If you join us, we'll carve out an independent nation just for your kind. A place where you can thrive without interference from ignorant governments. Surely, you'd rather see your school and your friends safe than risk more needless conflict. Coulson's face tightened. Garrett's offer was dangerously tempting for any mutant, and he worried Lucian might be swayed. Just as Coulson opened his mouth to warn him, a firm hand gripped his arm, Black Widow, giving him a subtle signal to hold back. Lucian followed Black Widow's gaze and spotted Captain America and Professor X standing a short distance away. The realization hit him all at once. With two of the world's most trusted heroes here, there was no way Hydra could pull off any deception. The moment Garrett finished his pitch, Lucian's lips curled into a cold sneer. I refuse to believe anything Hydra says, he began steadily. And let's be clear, there are no mutants in the world today, only people with superpowers. My school isn't called the Mutant Academy, it's the Superpower Academy. We don't need a mutant nation, because mutants don't even exist. If Hydra tries to build one, it won't be my students who suffer in the end. It'll be you. He stepped forward, voice low but fierce. And should true mutants ever emerge, they'd be an unstoppable force. Do you really think Hydra would ever allow them to form a sovereign state? The moment my students sign on with you, they'll end up as lab rats on your operating tables. Frankly, you're in no position to threaten us. You'll regret the day you underestimated the Superpower Academy. Garrett's face went pale. He opened his mouth to argue, then snapped it shut. With Lucian's resolve so clear, persuasion had become impossible. Now, all he could do was wait for the school to be taken, then look for a chance to escape. Can they really pinpoint our location? Maria Hill and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents stood by the panoramic window, watching Hydra gunships streak across the sky. Their brows were drawn tight with worry. Those armed helicopters weren't just carrying Hydra soldiers. They bristled with energy cannons and even small missile launchers. If Hydra zeroed in on the school, we'd stand no chance. Relax, Lucian said, leaning casually against the sill. The loyalty charm cloaks this entire area. They could hunt year-round and never find us. Phil Coulson exchanged a grim look with Natasha Romanoff. That only works against targeted reconnaissance, Natasha warned. Hydra will carpet bomb the perimeter. Even if they can't lock on precisely, they'll just fire indiscriminately. Innocent people nearby will die. Lucian shrugged. Our barrier repels conventional munitions. Let them waste their firepower. Coulson shook his head. Hydra doesn't care about waste. They'll shell every square mile until something gives. Lucian's confidence didn't waver. Then let them come. We won't be forced onto the defensive. He paused, a sly smile crossing his face. Or, he tapped his temple lightly, I could deploy the brainwave amplifier and take control of their pilots myself. At that moment, from the far side of the war room table, Professor Charles Xavier cleared his throat and spoke up. Lucian sat alone in the observation chamber, his mind humming with raw power. He'd reached level 3 psychic status, no small feat, but still a step below the legendary Professor X. With his brainwave amplifier strapped on, Lucian could normally seize control of dozens of Hydra soldiers at once. Tonight, though, the room felt strangely quiet. Across from him, Agent Coulson shifted in his seat. I'm afraid it won't work this time, Lucian. Lucian frowned. Why? Even at level 3, I should be able to dominate them. Coulson swallowed. Because every Hydra operative you see out there is wearing a brainwave isolator. S.H.I.E.L.D. developed the technology after you tampered with Black Widow and me. He glanced at Nick Fury, who stood by the window, arms folded. Fury ordered a prototype that blocks all telepathic intrusion when attached to the temples. He didn't want any surprises. Fury's dark eyes met Lucian's. We knew Professor X's abilities were public knowledge. We couldn't risk Hydra scooping up on us. And they did. Their agents pinned us from the inside. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s been compromised. Lucian's heart sank. Hydra stole the isolators? Or has its own version, Coulson admitted. They've got traitors tucked into every departmental fold. Garrett, for one, fed them detailed blueprints of the Super Academy. Hydra knows as much about our defenses as we do. Fury turned back to Lucian. You're impressive, kid, but the real prize on Hydra's target list is the young Professor X we helped restore. He's a level 4 mutant, and they'll stop at nothing to bring him down. Lucian clenched his fist. Hydra might have foiled his psychic charge tonight, but he wouldn't be sidelined forever. He'd find another way, and soon he would remind them just how dangerous a determined telepath could be. Professor Xavier's log. While the battle raged in New Mexico, neither S.H.I.E.L.D. nor Hydra suspected the larger threat unfolding elsewhere. They were locked in a brutal stalemate, unaware of the Divine Realm's existence and ignorant of Thor's true heritage. For Hydra, neutralizing Professor Xavier was the highest priority. Once he was out of the picture, the Super Academy could be contained without much trouble. By deploying a newly developed neural dampener around Xavier's cerebro room, they had effectively cut off his telepathic link to the outside world. Without his mind at full power, Professor X was, for now, helpless. Lucian twitched at the news. Nick Fury had a reputation for distributing cutting-edge tech, even to the enemy. He rubbed the back of his neck and exchanged a glance with Logan. So what's the plan? We just waltz in there and fight them head-on, like in the Divine Realm. Logan flexed his fingers, the adamantium claws whispering free. Their foot soldiers might survive a few strikes, but they're no match for us. Tony Stark's absence still cast a shadow over the mission, but Bruce Banner was now fully capable of transforming into the Hulk at will. Steve's shield had been reforged and enhanced with vibranium weave, better than ever, and Lucian himself had trained alongside them, mastering a suite of arcane defenses. They were more than ready. Thor stood off to one side, gaze fixed on the war-torn wall beside him. Well said, he rumbled, voice echoing with regret. If only I could lift Mjolnir again. With my hammer in hand, this operation would be over before it began. He punched the stone wall in frustration. Without the full return of his divine spark, even the god of thunder was hamstrung. Fury cleared his throat. Then let's move. Xavier's neural inhibitors expire in 20 minutes. After that, we run out of time. The assembled heroes nodded. Shields up, claws out, and spell circles at the ready. This was how they'd topple Hydra's stronghold and rescue the world from a darkness they could barely imagine. Lucian sat alone in the school courtyard, his dark hair ruffled by the morning breeze and arcane runes glowing faintly across his arms. He had been buried in his ancient tomes for hours, preparing for the confrontation ahead. At last, he snapped the book shut and rose to his feet, a confident smile tugging at his lips. "Don't worry so much," he said, glancing toward the tree line where Hydra's patrols had gathered. "I'll send them a thunderbolt first. If they survive that, then we can talk about Plan B." He drew a slender wand from beneath his cloak, a new artifact forged during his journey through the God Realm, and felt its power thrumming at his fingertips. Lucian raised it overhead and began to chant in the old language, each syllable resonating through the air like distant thunder. His previous experiments with ancient magic had only produced a barely noticeable flicker of energy. Now, infused by the wand's amplified potency, his spell would stretch 20 times farther than before. It was more than enough to blanket every Hydra soldier in range. "Let the storm come," he whispered, his voice steady as the first tendrils of magic curled skyward. Within 5 minutes, the sky above the school darkened unnaturally fast. Ominous clouds gathered, swirling in perfect formation until they blotted out the sun. Thunderclaps echoed overhead, and jagged bolts of lightning danced among the clouds, waiting to strike. Nearby residents paused in confusion. The local forecast had promised clear skies today, while the Hydra troops exchanged uneasy glances, unaware of the furious tempest Lucian had summoned for them. Chapter 233. You're more like Thor than I am. "Sitwell, have you located our targets?" Alexander Pierce's voice cut through the dim hum of the command center at the Triskelion, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s fortified headquarters in Washington, D.C. Agent Sitwell, seated before a bank of flickering monitors, didn't look up immediately. "Not yet, Minister Pierce. We're still cross-referencing the intelligence files." Pierce's gaze remained fixed on the screens. Once S.H.I.E.L.D.'s director, he now served as the World Security Council's minister and secretly led Hydra's branch within S.H.I.E.L.D. He deliberately ceded the directorship to Nick Fury, betting that Fury would raise S.H.I.E.L.D.'s global stature while allowing Hydra to flourish in the shadows. The gamble had paid off. Under Fury's leadership, S.H.I.E.L.D. had grown from a domestic agency, no more influential than the CIA or FBI, into the planet's preeminent security organization. Most nations now granted S.H.I.E.L.D. carte blanche, enabling it to monitor activities worldwide. Unbeknownst to most, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s global reach was Hydra's as well. Every bit of technology, every fragment of intelligence, every resource S.H.I.E.L.D. amassed flowed into Hydra's coffers, while Hydra's own assets remained concealed from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s operatives. Pierce turned away from the monitors, his expression unreadable as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Potomac River. "Keep me updated," he said. "We can't afford any more slip-ups." Sitwell nodded and resumed his work, the screens before him alive with data. In those scrolling lines lay the fate of Hydra's latest operation and the world itself. Lucian had long understood that Hydra's power eclipsed S.H.I.E.L.D.'s. If he allowed the organization to grow unchecked, he could quietly replace S.H.I.E.L.D. from the inside, turn every agent, every department, into Hydra assets. Then Nick Fury, enticed by Hydra's promises, would carry out the Insight plan exactly as intended. Before anyone realized what was happening, Hydra would hold the world in its grasp. Recently, however, complications forced Lucian's hand. Fury had begun to smell betrayal within his own ranks, and quietly launched an internal investigation of S.H.I.E.L.D. That meant Lucian had to accelerate his timetable. Fortunately, Hydra already controlled high-level officials in governments around the globe. Fury couldn't expose Lucian's crimes through normal channels. Instead, Fury resorted to a covert game of cat and mouse. Even without having total superiority in every department, Lucian's network of planted spies kept him one step ahead. By the end of today's operation, Fury himself was finished, utterly neutralized. Only 2 or 3 rookie agents remained in S.H.I.E.L.D., nothing more than kittens mauling a lion. Still, Lucian had one nagging concern: Fury's growing suspicion about the source feeding him information. He knew that as long as Fury doubted where his intel was coming from, no secret was truly safe. And so Lucian began preparing his next move, tightening the noose before Fury could tighten his. Professor Charles Xavier and his X-Men have saved the world more times than anyone can count. To Hydra, however, they're an unacceptable threat, and they must be eliminated. Rather than launch a full-blown assault right away, Hydra lured Agent Phil Coulson and a handful of lesser operatives into a trap, hoping they'd unwittingly reveal the location of Xavier's hidden school. Once they had the coordinates, the plan was to strike with overwhelming force. "We've swept the entire valley," the reconnaissance officer reported. "No sign of Xavier or his mutants." Gideon Pierce snorted. "Those mutants really are slippery. All right, prepare a carpet bombing run. Flatten the area. I refuse to believe they can stay hidden forever." Outside, 3 of Hydra's cutting-edge aerospace carriers powered up, completing their final system checks. Concealment was no longer necessary. A massive bombardment would serve as the inauguration of Hydra's global reign. Pierce was confident. Intelligence indicated Xavier's unwavering commitment to protect civilians will force him to expose himself under fire, even if he could shield them telepathically. That moral code, Pierce decided, was Xavier's greatest weakness. And as for Lucian, the name some whispered as the true leader of the mutants, Pierce dismissed it as Hydra disinformation. Professor X was the real target, and Pierce intended to pull every lever until Xavier and his X-Men were crushed. "What about Garrett and the others?" Sitwell asked, his voice tight. A full-scale strike like this would almost certainly cost Garrett and Grant their lives. Pierce lifted an eyebrow. "They'll feel honored to lay down their lives for Hydra's cause. We will ensure their sacrifice is remembered." "Long live Hydra," Sitwell echoed instantly, seizing the slogan. Pierce turned to the monitors. "Crossbones, you mentioned weather complications. Clarify." The screen flickered, then filled with the imposing figure of Crossbones in full battle gear. He snapped a salute. "Sir, requested weather update." Sitwell frowned. Inclement weather rarely hindered Hydra's elite operatives. They'd been trained to push through rain, sleet, and blizzards alike. Crossbones ignored him, stepping to a console and pressing a button. With a low hiss, the armored van's roof retracted, unveiling a roiling black sky split by arcs of lightning. "This isn't a normal storm," Crossbones said, his voice grave. "It's something far more dangerous." "Normal thunderstorms don't produce this much lightning," Lucian muttered as he stared up at the churning sky. In a typical storm, you'd see a flash of lightning, hear thunder rumble seconds later, and then feel the rain begin to pour. But here, there was no thunder, no downpour, only an endless weave of jagged bolts dancing among the clouds, growing ever denser. Could this really be the work of a mutant? Lucian's mind raced back to the dossiers he'd read. The X-Men had a mutant called Storm who could summon lightning and stir up tempests, but nothing suggested she could orchestrate an assault of this magnitude. An upgraded version of Storm? The idea sent a shiver through him. "Attack! Now!" he ordered, his voice steel. At his command, the armed helicopters banked and tilted their energy cannons skyward. Below, the tank crews adjusted the elevation of their barrels. Every weapon locked onto the roiling heavens. Lucian's directive was simple but brutal. Bomb the entire area, inch by inch, until the storm itself could no longer form. With that, the first shells launched, tracer trails arcing into the clouds. Then came the barrage. Boom, 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 each explosion rattling the ground and echoing back from the mountains. The deafening rhythm of fire and fury filled the air, a desperate counterstroke against the unnatural storm blazing above. It wasn't gunships or tanks that struck first. It was thunder and lightning ripping through the sky. At Lucian's command, every mine detonated in perfect unison, zeroing in on the exposed gunships and tanks. Even the larger command vehicle housing Sitwell and Crossbones wasn't spared. "Feels like the end of the world," Coulson gasped, eyes wide. He and the rest of the team watched as Lucian lifted his staff. Bolts of lightning hurled downward like divine wrath, each strike obliterating armored plating and sending twisted metal hurtling into the air. Thor stared upward, awe written on his face. "Lucian, you wield thunder better than I ever could," he admitted. Back in Asgard, Lucian had summoned lightning before, but never on this scale. Even with Mjolnir in his grasp, the thunder god doubted he could match such raw, unbridled power. Logan laughed and clapped Thor on the shoulder. Thor, you're lost, he teased. You should be called the Hammer God. As smoke curled across the shattered battlefield, Lucian slowly lowered his staff. The storm's electric charge still danced in the air, proof that sometimes victory truly is thunder from on high. Lucian and his companion are both hearty drinkers. They spend their evenings together, raising mug after mug and exchanging tall tales, and in the glow-o, each boisterous night, they've forged a firm friendship. Chapter 234, Metal Statue Attacks, Second Update. Get out of here. Sitwell and Crossbones didn't hesitate for a second. The command vehicle groaned and buckled under Lucian's relentless lightning strikes, its armor plating smoking, windows shattering. Normally, a car's steel shell and rubber tires form a Faraday cage, channeling a lightning bolt harmlessly around the occupants. So long as they don't touch any metal surfaces, their bodies remain protected. But Lucian wasn't discharging a single bolt here and there. He was directing dozens of them at once, all focused on disabling every armed helicopter, tank, and transport truck in sight. The energy lavaged into each vehicle was catastrophic. Engines seized, fuel lines ruptured, hulls splintered. And once the vehicle's structure failed, anyone still inside faced instant destruction. Realizing the danger, Hydra's elite soldiers scrambled for their lives. Gunners and drivers tumbled out of their tanks and armored transports, diving for cover behind debris. Those aboard the hovering gunships didn't wait. They hit the eject button and parachuted into the darkened sky, praying the storm below wouldn't claim them on the way down. But escaping Lucian's fury was easier said than done. As the storm raged on, the battlefield became a gauntlet of sparking wreckage and whistling wind, proof that no metal shell, no matter how fortified, could stand against the storm god's wrath. Parachuting will only get you killed faster. Above the battlefield, Lucian tilted his wand ever so slightly. The bolts of lightning arcing toward the armed helicopters veered off course and struck the parachuting Hydra soldiers instead. One by one, they plummeted to the ground, their bodies reduced to charcoal husks on impact. Agent Phil Coulson surveyed the smoldering remains in stunned silence. As a SHIELD operative, he felt little sympathy for Hydra operatives, yet he couldn't help comparing this scene to the old days under Professor Xavier, when the X-Men had gone to great lengths to avoid lethal force. Lucian's Superpower Academy spared no mercy. If I ever end up on his bad side, Coulson thought, I'm doomed. Fall back now. From the command vehicle's intercom, Agent Sitwell's urgent voice crackled through. He vaulted clear of the cabin alongside Crossbones, both dashing toward the edge of the looming storm clouds. Under Lucian's redirected lightning strikes, any continued engagement was suicide. And even if Hydra's paratroopers feared nothing, they had no idea where their unseen enemy lurked. With heavy hearts and heavy boots, they retreated into the gathering gloom, leaving the charred battlefield behind. Lucian's voice rang out above the roar of thunder. Fall back and regroup. Contact command. Tell them to dispatch the insulated battle gear. We'll need it before our next assault. Professor Xavier appeared at Lucian's side in an instant, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Together, they closed their eyes, extending their minds across the battlefield. Although every Hydra operative wore neural dampeners to block telepathic control, Professor Xavier could still sense their general coordinates. He fed Lucian the real-time positions, allowing Lucian to adjust his power with pinpoint accuracy. Lightning exploded overhead, each bolt a coiled serpent of white-hot energy. Lucian raised his arms, fingertips crackling, and redirected the course of the storm. There, he murmured, through the southern column. Now! With a deafening series of impacts, lightning detonated among the retreating Hydra soldiers. Men in black armor scattered across the decimated courtyard, heads ducking as arcs of electricity tore the ground at their heels. They sprinted toward the swirling black clouds overhead, but no matter how fast they ran, the lightning pursued them, striking again and again. Hydra recruits boasted superior strength, far beyond any ordinary human, but they were no match for the godlike speed of Lucian's storm. Within minutes, the once proud squad had been cut to pieces or driven back under the cover of the gathering storm. Lucian and Professor Xavier stood firm amid the echoing thunder, the air around them shimmering with residual electricity. Lucian turned to his mentor, determination shining in his eyes. They'll regroup at the rendezvous point, he he said, voice steady. Once we've got our insulated suits, we push forward. This battle isn't over. Professor Xavier nodded. You've bought us exactly the time we needed. Headquarters will have those uniforms in 10 minutes. Prepare yourselves. As the last crackle of lightning faded, Lucian lowered his arms, sweat mingling with rain. He glanced at the horizon, already plotting their next move. The war against Hydra was far from finished, but today, at least, they had won the field. Lucian's lightning crackled through the tense air, and even the veterans from the god's domain, battle-hardened champions all, shuddered under its force. Hydra's frontline troops fared far worse. 2 or 3 strikes were enough to send them screaming to the ground, their bodies charred and lifeless. Colossal arcane barrages might barely bruise those with legendary strength, but to ordinary infantry, they were lethal. Yet not every Hydra soldier fell. A handful managed to slip beyond the shifting boundary of Lucian's storm clouds and staggered away, miraculously alive. Among them were Sitwell and Crossbones, and, surprisingly, several Winter soldiers, their bodies enhanced to rival even Captain America's in speed and resilience. Their survival owed more to Lucian's restraint than to any tactical brilliance. He had deliberately held his hand, intent on capturing key operatives alive. Had he unleashed the full fury of his storm, hundreds of lightning bolts converging on a single target, none would have lived to crawl away. Go, Lucian commanded, lowering his intricately carved wand. With a graceful flick, he sealed the ancient runes that had summoned the tempest. All around him, the towering metal sentinels he had painstakingly forged, 70 lifelike statues, each alloyed with iron from the old battlefields, sprang instantly to life. Their joints hummed, and eyes of molten bronze glowed as they pivoted to obey his silent summons. As the survivors of Hydra's dreadful experiment fled into the night, Lucian moved through the wreckage of the courtyard with calm precision. Tomorrow, he would interrogate Sitwell and Crossbones. For now, he had other plans. The statues, each standing over 10 feet tall, fell into formation behind him, their collective presence a testament to his mastery of both ancient lore and modern craft. He surveyed the smoking ruins of the school grounds one last time. Soon, even this battlefield would bear no trace of his passing. Satisfied, Lucian turned toward the manor beyond the broken gates, his cloak swirling like storm clouds after rain. The hunt for answers had only just begun. Suddenly, the once lifeless metal statues sprang to life. Their eyes ignited with an eerie glow as they unleashed guttural roars and stamped across the courtyard toward the edge of the school grounds. Their orders were simple: track down and capture the last Hydra that had broken free. Lucian often found the mimicry and transmutation spell almost too good to be true. Unlike a basic awakening charm, which merely unlocks a semblance of consciousness in inert matter, this magic actually imparts genuine abilities drawn from the caster's own imaginative intent. When he reshaped a bronze figure into a fire dragon, it didn't just look the part. It flapped its iron wings, soared into the air, and bellowed a draconic roar. Under ordinary physics, no chunk of metal, no matter how many sculpted wings it sported, could ever truly lift off the ground. If he could refine this spell, Lucian mused, any metal statue might one day manifest the powers he envisioned, a 9-tailed fox that beguiles all who look upon it, a phoenix that burns in brilliant flame only to rise again from its metallic ashes, even Cerberus, with 3 snarling heads capable of devouring souls. The possibilities, he realized, were as boundless as his own creativity. Sunlong of Morgana's faction had already hinted at this. The ordinary cloth dragon mimicries could be transformed into real, fire-breathing dragons. These statues are alive. Coulson and the others stared in disbelief as the towering metal figures took flight. When they'd followed Lucian into the school, they'd seen 4 to 5 meter tall statues of gleaming steel, but never imagined those inert-looking sentinels could spring to life, obeying Lucian's commands. For the Hydra soldiers facing them, it was a grim realization. Each colossal automaton easily weighed over 100 tons. Any attempt at close combat would end in utter devastation. Even the enhanced Winter soldiers, bred for battle, stood little chance against such near-indestructible adversaries. Conventional firearms simply bounced off the metal hulls. Only Hydra's prototype energy weapons might stand a chance of cracking their defenses, and those were in painfully limited supply. Lucian's plan unfolded exactly as Director Coulson and the others had expected. He'd forged his metal statues from the finest defensive alloys, making them nearly impervious to energy weapons. Short of pulverizing them entirely, no blast could compromise their structural integrity, so the statues remained fully functional in combat. By the time the team reached the school's front square, they found Agent Sitwell, Crossbones, and a squad of winter soldiers pinned against walls and pillars, their noses bruised and faces swollen from relentless impact with Lucian's constructs. "Next time I'm in Wakanda," Lucian quipped, "I'm bringing back some vibranium. Then these defenses will be truly unbreakable." He crouched beside one statue, examining the tiny pits left by a high-powered energy cannon. Regular energy rifles made barely a dent, but ramp up the output and even top-grade alloys show wear. Vibranium, he knew, would shrug off every strike. Straightening with a determined look, Lucian closed his eyes for a moment. With vibranium-reinforced statues anchoring their line, there would be no stopping them. Chapter 235, Clues to the Cosmic Cube, Update 1. "Babaji!" Steve cried out as his shield clattered to the ground. A metallic nine-tailed fox had wrapped Bucky in its gleaming tails, pinning him helplessly. Steve lunged forward, but Lucian stepped between them and casually waved his hand. Obeying the gesture, the metal fox released Bucky and set him gently on the floor. "Bucky, you're alive! Thank God!" Steve knelt beside his friend and threw his arms around him. Joy swelled in his chest. Aside from Peggy Carter, his great love, Bucky Barnes was family. He'd grown up with Steve, fought by his side, survived life-and-death missions together. Ever since Bucky's apparent death, Steve had mourned him for over 60 years. To see him breathing again was a miracle, but the reunion shattered the moment Steve felt Bucky's cold mechanical fist slam into his chin. Enhanced though he was, the blow drove him backward, teeth rattling. Bucky, his mind wiped and his loyalties unknown, glared at Steve with empty eyes. Without another word, he seized the chance and bolted toward the school gates, metal limbs clanking as he fled. Bucky's programming had wiped his memory, but left his intellect intact. Realizing he stood no chance against his pursuers, he bolted. "Lucian!" Coulson shouted. As Bucky's figure receded, and the metal sentinels remained motionless, Coulson and the others exchanged worried glances. Lucian raised a hand, his expression calm. "He won't get away," he assured them. He turned toward the school's front gates. "Lock down the perimeter. Alert the guard post." A savage roar answered him moments later. The steel doors of the guardhouse burst open, and there, striding forward in his terrifying abomination form, was Colonel Bronsky. Just as Bucky leapt for the wall, the hulking security chief lunged, catching him effortlessly midair. Cradling the stunned, brainwashed agent in one massive hand, Abomination strode back through the gates. "I never would have guessed it was him," Coulson said, astonished. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files had painstakingly documented Bronsky's transformation, the Hulk's Broadway clash with Lucian, and the presumed death of the Abomination. Now they learned that not only was he alive, he'd been reassigned as the school's head of security all along. Since the explosion at Culver University, General Thunderbolt Ross had been breathing down Nick Fury's neck, insisting that Fury activate his contact with Lucian and hand over both the Hulk and the Abomination. Fury finally quieted Ross by producing a classified S.H.I.E.L.D. dossier, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and proof of illegal experiments in which Ross himself was implicated. For now, that was enough to keep the general at bay. Yet Ross remained convinced his mind had been tampered with by Hydra, and so he appealed to Professor Charles Xavier for help. Lucian met Xavier at a discreet safe house on the outskirts of Washington. Inside, Alexei Sitwell, once a S.H.I.E.L.D. intelligence officer, now an uneasy asset of Hydra, was under guard. Sitwell knew more about Hydra's global network than most, but he'd never been privy to the organization's deadliest secrets. Lucian greeted Professor Xavier with a brief nod and turned to Sitwell. "Latemans," he whispered, their agreed command to unlock the mind's deepest layers. He settled his palm lightly against Sitwell's temple and unleashed a wave of focused telepathy. Sitwell's memories flickered like film reels, covert shipments, research dossiers, security codes. Deeper still, Lucian unearthed buried data, coordinates for the Hydra Arms Depot, where a cosmic cube fragment was being converted into an energy weapon. Most important of all, he pinpointed the vault that housed the Space Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones. After a moment, Lucian drew back, a small, satisfied smile forming on his lips. "Found it," he said quietly. "The depot's out on the eastern seaboard. That's our target, Hydra's next superweapon, powered by the Space Stone." Lucian's plan was simple. If Hydra could use machinery to tap the Space Stone's power and forge devastating weapons, why not retool the same apparatus to extract energy for his own purposes, namely, meditation? If he succeeded, he'd end up with a crystal of essentially limitless magic force. Even if that experiment failed, the energy he harvested could still be channeled into constructing the new school. And in the longer term, he could adapt the setup to power a floating city, converting raw cosmic energy into electricity to run an entire airborne metropolis. There was another advantage, too. By keeping the Space Stone in his possession, he'd add an extra layer of defense for Earth. Suppose Loki ever broke free from the prison in the realm of the gods, made a deal with Thanos again, and set his sights on retrieving the cosmic cube here. He would have to contend with Lucian's safeguards first, and without that cube, the Chitauri army couldn't be summoned to Earth at all. So, what do you think? Just then, Lucian withdrew from his mental link with Agent Sitwell. Natasha Romanoff and director Phil Coulson, who had been watching him read Sitwell's memories, hurried forward to join him. Lucian studied the data hovering in midair, then met everyone's gaze with calm resolve. Sitwell's mind scan confirms it. The 3 airborne carriers will launch in approximately 60 minutes. At once, Natasha Romanoff, Director Coulson, Agent Hill, and Hawkeye snapped to attention. A 1-hour flight from New York to Washington was all they had, and once those carriers were aloft, their advanced stealth and anti-recon systems would render them invisible to every sensor. Miss this window, and there would be no way to track or stop them. Lucian turned to Professor Xavier. "Professor, what's our next move?" Professor X gently withdrew his hands from Bucky Barnes's temples, ending his psychic treatment, and offered Lucian a reassuring nod. "Steve Rogers will lead the ground assault. Bucky's mental state is stable again. Bruce Banner and Logan will join him. Lucian, you take the X-Jet. You'll be in Washington in 30 minutes. Natasha, Coulson, Hill, Hawkeye, you're with him." Xavier's eyes clouded with fatigue. "I fear I may have overextended my telepathy just now. I need time to recover, but there isn't a moment to lose." A tense silence fell over the control room before every agent sprang into action. The clock was ticking, and failure wasn't an option. Lucian leaned against the crumbling wall of the safe house and shook his head. "I need to rest for a bit. I'm going to sit this one out." His teammates exchanged glances. A moment ago, Lucian had unleashed every trick in his arsenal, energy projections, gravity shifts, phasing through barriers, and yet he stood there as fresh as ever. Coulson, watching him with a frown, couldn't hide his skepticism. He'd seen plenty of powered allies burn out mid-battle, trembling limbs, wavering voices, the telltale slump of total exhaustion. Lucian showed none of it. Still, who was Coulson to question him? This was a mission led by Captain America himself, flanked by Wolverine, the man who'd weathered more battles than anyone dared count, the unstoppable Hulk, and the Winter Soldier, whose intimate knowledge of Hydra's secrets had already saved their skins more than once. Between those 4, they'd crushed Hydra's elite strike team. Their next target, the tri-curved wing facility, would hardly pose a challenge. Lucian's eyes glittered with a hidden purpose as he straightened. He gave Coulson a brief nod and slipped away down the shadowed corridor, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his footsteps. In reality, he wasn't seeking rest. He was heading for Hydra's central laboratory, where the cosmic cube lay locked in a power matrix alongside the prototype extractor machine. If he could seize both artifacts, he held the key not only to winning this fight, but to reshaping the balance of superhuman abilities across the world. Behind him, the others rallied around Captain America's shield. Coulson sighed, turning to regroup with the team. He still didn't trust Lucian's sudden withdrawal, but as long as the mission succeeded, Coulson could afford to let it go, for now. Lucian offered a sincere nod. "Thank you. If S.H.I.E.L.D. survives this ordeal and you ever need our support, count us in." Coulson returned his gaze with quiet determination. They all understood the weight of Fury's final gesture. Just before he died, Nick Fury had handed over the cube, the repository of every secret SHIELD base in operation, to Coulson. That cube wasn't just a data drive, it was the symbol of leadership. By entrusting it to him, Fury effectively passed on the directorship of SHIELD. Once this crisis is behind them, assuming SHIELD still stands, Phil Coulson will be its new director. Chapter 236, Hydras and Humans, second update. How is this possible? The entire force was annihilated, and even the Winter Soldiers didn't escape. Inside the Triskelions' command center, Pierce stared in shock at the feed that had dissolved into static. Rage and disbelief warped his features. He had never imagined that a so-called mutant school could wield such terrifying power. His finest units, elite Hydra operatives armed with cutting-edge energy weapons, backed by more than 30 Winter Soldiers on par with Captain America, had vanished in moments, as if vaporized. There were no survivors, no distress calls, nothing. Pierce's mind raced. Could it have been Lucian? He recalled how he'd previously dismissed Lucian as nothing more than Professor X's figurehead, the public face for the Superpower Academy, formerly the Mutant Academy. Everyone assumed Professor X himself was the true mastermind and the most formidable mutant on campus. Yet even when Hydra scientists deployed their neural isolation device, completely nullifying Professor X's telepathy, Lucian's side still unleashed that catastrophic, city-shaking lightning strike. Now Pierce realized he might have gravely underestimated the boy who'd been quietly orchestrating it all. Hydra's command center was alive with tension. Screens lined the walls, each one displaying real-time feeds from reconnaissance drones and surveillance satellites trained on the Superpower Academy. A stern-faced officer leaned forward, tapping at a holographic display. Our intelligence confirms there's a mutant at the Academy who rivals Professor X in raw power, he reported. We've verified Wolverine Logan's data, and the rest are still just students. The only other candidate is the Academy's publicly declared principal, Lucian. It seems we underestimated him. Across the table, Hydra's supreme leader narrowed his eyes. So Lucian isn't merely a figurehead. He's the true master of that place, and easily its strongest mutant. Prepare for countermeasures. He turned to his aide. Immediately alert Dr. Zora. Deploy every newly built robot soldier to our defensive perimeters. The aide nodded and tapped a command into a nearby console. Moments later, a secure channel crackled to life. Dr. Zora, report, came the voice of the aide. You are to mobilize all available robotic units around the carrier and the Cosmic Cube Vault. We cannot risk Lucian striking before takeoff. Dr. Zora's smooth response crackled through the speaker. Understood. All Hydra prototypes are on standby at Hangar Bay Delta. I'll have them en route within minutes. The aide switched off the channel and allowed himself a thin smile. The recent Queens incident had yielded unexpected dividends. After S-Shield agents raided Anton Vanko's private workshop, they stumbled upon his development files for autonomous battle units. That data was quietly siphoned into Hydra's vaults, and, thanks to Hydra's superior reverse engineering capabilities, a full battalion of advanced robot soldiers soon followed. Yet, despite the opportunity, Hydra's leadership had held back. Progress here had been smooth, and more importantly, Lucian himself had slain Nick Fury during Fury's last desperate attempt to derail their plans. Fearing that deploying prototypes prematurely might provoke unforeseen backlash, the robots had remained docked. Now was a different story. Under Dr. Zora's command, those very machines were to become the bulwark protecting the Cosmic Cube, an object of immeasurable power, until the aerospace carrier could launch. The hangar lights dimmed as heavy blast doors slid open. On the tarmac beyond, sleek, humanoid forms stood at rigid attention, their polymer shells gleaming beneath spotlights. Hydra's leaders watched in grim satisfaction. Lucian might be the most formidable mutant alive, but when steel-clad automatons stood between him and the Cosmic Cube, even his extraordinary gifts would face their greatest test. And as the carrier's engines began to hum, Hydra braced for the inevitable clash that would decide the fate of the world. Colonel Pierce frowned as he issued the orders. He had no choice but to redirect Coulson's remaining operatives, undisciplined, unpredictable, trash, in his words, to bolster the defenses here before the mutant cadre from the Superpower Academy could mount a counterattack on the Triskelion. I should never have underestimated those mutants, he muttered to himself. irritation and regret warring in his voice. He replayed the sequence of mistakes in his mind. If only he'd taken Coulson and the other agents alive, rather than executing Fury's strike team outright. With them in custody, he could have boarded the aerospace carrier, seized global control, then subjected his captives to mind control until they spilled every last detail about the Academy's location. That, he decided, would have been far safer than the gamble he'd just taken. His overconfidence had been his downfall. After storming the Triskelion, eliminating Nick Fury, and seizing the building, he'd allowed himself the luxury of arrogance. A handful of adult mutants at the Superpower Academy seemed a trivial concern, easily neutralized later. Now, however, with those same mutants poised to strike, he realized how precarious his position had become. No, he corrected himself aloud. This still isn't safe enough. I need reinforcements. He reached for the secure communicator on his desk. Only one person had enough resources, and the ruthlessness, to help him now. Pacing the length of his office, Colonel Pierce tapped the activation pad. The voice of Baron Strat, another high-ranking Hydra Lord, crackled on the other end. Pierce steeled himself. If he was going to secure the Triskelion and crush the Superpower Academy once and for all, he would need every agent Strat could spare, and then some. Hydra operates on a global scale, but it isn't a single, unified organization. Rather, it's divided into dozens of semi-independent cells. Lucian leads one such faction, born from the remnants of Zora's Red Skull. Deeply embedded within S-Healed, his cell thrives on siphoning agency intelligence and resources. Lucian's ultimate goal is to deploy Zora's algorithm and the Insight Initiative to place Hydra firmly in control of the world. Elsewhere, Baron Strat commands another branch out of Sokovia. He seeks world domination by creating superpowered operatives through advanced research and experimentation. Though Lucian and Strat share the same endgame, their approaches differ, and while they'll lend each other aid when interests align, neither bows to the other. Now that Lucian has officially launched the Insight Initiative, the other Hydra leaders have quietly offered logistical support, but none have sent their own people to work directly on the project. Fortunately, Lucian's relationship with Baron Strat remains solid. After all, the Sokovian research facility was purchased in S-Shield's name at Strat's request, so borrowing a handful of Strat's enhanced agents should be a straightforward matter. Hydra's Sokovian stronghold, Baron Strat ended the call with a dismissive flick of his upgraded mechanical right hand, the Satan's Claw. He turned to his lieutenant. "Bring Jiaying in." A moment later, Jiaying stepped through the reinforced doors. She was young, with fine Asian features and an air of restrained power. "Lord Strat," she said, bowing her head. "Jiaying," he began, voice cold as steel, "I want Gordon to take your tribe's fiercest warriors and deploy them to Pierce. And bring your daughter Daisy along. I hear her abilities have only grown stronger." Jiaying's gaze flickered, but only for an instant. Strat leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Never forget who saved your people from Reinhardt's slaughter. Show me loyalty, and when Hydra takes its rightful place, I'll grant you a territory of your own. There, you can rebuild your clan in peace, far from prying eyes or unwelcome borders." "Long live Hydra," Jiaying declared, her voice steady as she echoed the slogan. "You have my loyalty, Baron." Strat nodded, satisfied, and dismissed her with a curt wave. Jiaying turned on her heel and departed, leaving the Baron alone with his ambitions and the whispered promise of conquest still echoing in the metal halls. Chapter 1. Immortal Vigil. Lucian closed the door to his chamber behind him and let out a quiet sigh. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, but tonight the darkness felt less oppressive. He had survived another close call, and for an inhuman who should have lived forever, every narrow escape was a reminder that even eternity could be fragile. For centuries, Lucian had guided the scattered Inhumans on Earth. Hidden within a secret sanctuary they called the Afterlife, his people nurtured one another in secrecy, wary of a world that feared and hunted them. His mission was simple, yet perilous. Seek out any human bearing the dormant Inhuman gene and help them unlock their potential and bring them into the fold. It was a purpose Lucian first embraced during World War II, when Hydra's merciless experiments shattered his solitude. While tracing rumors of Inhumans in occupied Europe, he was captured by Werner Reinhardt himself. The notorious Hydra scientist ripped from him the obelisk, a dark relic encrusted with Terrigen crystals. Those crystals held the power to Terrigenize anyone with alien DNA, igniting supernatural abilities in inhumans, but turning ordinary humans to stone in an instant. Reinhardt's experiments were horrific, and before long, innocent souls became statues in his underground labs. Lucian prayed for deliverance, and deliverance came in the form of Peggy Carter's Howling Commandos. Their midnight assault obliterated Reinhardt's compound. In the confusion, Lucian reclaimed the obelisk and escaped into the night, free once more to protect his people. After the war, Lucian returned to the afterlife, resuming his centuries-long quest. He thought he understood what it meant to cherish what time could not touch. Then, in the spring of 1989, something happened he had never expected. He met Dr. Eleanor Shaw, a devoted physician volunteering at a small clinic. Her kindness was effortless, so unlike the war-scarred world Lucian had known. What began as professional curiosity grew into something deeper. Lucian confided in her, revealing his unimaginable past. Instead of recoiling, Eleanor took his hand and saw past his ageless face to the man beneath. They married in secret. A year later, Eleanor gave birth to a son, Marcus. Holding his infant child, Lucian felt an ache he had never known, the yearning to live a mortal life, to cherish every second as though it might be his last. For once, the thought of growing old alongside Eleanor, of watching Marcus learn to walk and talk, filled him more with hope than fear. But Hydra never forgets, and never forgives. Word of an undying man, living under an assumed name, eventually reached their highest ranks. Agents struck in the dead of night, seizing Eleanor and Marcus from their suburban home. The proof of Lucian's secret lay in his unchanging visage. 44 years had passed since he wed, yet he appeared just as he had in 1989. Now Lucian stands at a crossroads. He must draw upon every ounce of inhuman strength and every lesson learned across centuries to mount a rescue before Hydra's cruel hands can tear his family definition into pieces. In this battle, no obelisk or crystal can save him. Only the fierce, unbreakable bond of love might turn the tide. And if even immortality has its limits, Lucian will discover tonight where his true power lies. Lucian stood at the edge of the cold, marble-floored laboratory, his heart pounding as he watched Reinhardt approach the restrained figure on the operating table. From the moment Jiaying had been brought in under heavy guard, Reinhardt's sole obsession was clear: to discover the secret of Jiaying's rumored immortality by any means necessary, even if it meant performing a dissection on a living subject. Steel instruments gleamed under the harsh overhead lights. Reinhardt's gloved hands hovered over the first scalpel, eyes alight with scientific fervor. But before the blade could descend, Baron Stella swept into the room, her voice sharp and authoritative. "This stops now." She stepped between Reinhardt and the table, her presence so commanding that the scientists in the gallery fell silent. Reinhardt bristled. "Baroness, think of what we could learn." "I think of justice," Stella cut him off, her gaze unwavering, "and the sanctity of life." As Stella ordered the guards to release Jiaying, Lucian felt a tremor of relief. He knew Stella's intervention had not only saved Jiaying from a fate worse than death, but had also prevented a scientific atrocity that would stain their names forever. Outside the lab, the corridor was already filling with whispers. Lucian pressed a hand to his chest, fighting off the adrenaline. Tomorrow, he told himself, they would need a plan to protect Jiaying and to reckon with Reinhardt's relentless pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Chapter 237, Base on Isolated Island, third update. Baron Strat no longer obsessed over immortality. His resurrection had already arrested his aging. Instead, his ambition had shifted to a far stranger prize, the afterlife realm that Jiaying guarded. Rumors said it teemed with aliens of every kind, each harboring unique powers. When Strat learned that Jiaying's husband, Calvin, and their daughter, Daisy, were in his hands, she finally relented and revealed the hidden entrance. Under Strat's personal command, a contingent of Hydra soldiers struck in the dead of night. Cloaked in the island's swirling mists, they descended on the afterlife's crystalline caverns. Jiaying tried to mount a defense, but with Calvin and Daisy as hostages, resistance collapsed almost instantly. Within hours, the entire alien population, warriors and civilians alike, was in chains. Strat inspected the captives with keen interest. Many possessed supernatural abilities, telekinesis, energy projection, illusion weaving, but none proved truly battlefield-worthy. Their strengths were subtle or defensive. Generations of families had settled here, cultivating cultures rather than armies. Faced with Strat's ruthless advance, they surrendered without a fight. Confident he could harness their gifts, Strat hauled his prisoners back to his island laboratory. There, he subjected them to a battery of genetic tests and crystal infusion experiments. Time and again, he tried to isolate the rare elements that fueled their talents. Time and again, he failed. No matter how he mapped their DNA or engineered the crystal matrices, the spark of alien power eluded him. Frustration mounted. Strat realized that these abilities arose from an intricate, perhaps symbiotic bond between alien physiology and their native crystals, an equation far more complex than he had ever imagined. Dropping his tools, he stared at the inert test subjects and muttered under his breath, "So this is what true power looks like, and it's beyond even my reach." As the Hydra guards secured the cells, Strat's ambition darkened into something more obsessive than ever. If he couldn't copy these powers in the lab, he would have to find another path, and he would not rest until he discovered it. Because mass-producing superpowered soldiers with specific abilities would be impossible under his watch, Baron Strat resorted to a darker tactic. He ripped the relatives of every inhuman from the afterlife realm and scattered them to unknown locations, holding them hostage to guarantee Jiaying's, and by extension all inhumans, absolute obedience. "Gordon, take me to the afterlife." Jiaying lifted the special communicator from the desk. No sooner had she spoken than Gordon, an eyeless man gifted with the power to sense inhumans and teleport, materialized beside her. Without hesitation, he grasped her hand. In the blink of an eye, they vanished from the secure chamber and reappeared in the hidden sanctuary where the inhumans had lived for generations. Within moments, Jiaying summoned several inhumans trained for combat. She briefed them on the missions Baron Strat had assigned and, before dismissing them, offered one final directive. "Listen closely. Completing the mission is secondary. Your survival comes first. If you encounter any danger, Gordon will extract you immediately. Trust me to deal with Baron Strat." With that, the operatives dispersed, their loyalty secured by both fear and the promise of rescue. Gordon remained by Jiaying's side, ready to whisk them all away at the first sign of trouble. "And Daisy, your power is immense, but you can't control it perfectly yet. Stay focused and be cautious." With those parting words, Agent Gordon teleported Jiaying back to Hydra's underground stronghold in Sokovia. One by one, he then returned the rescued Inhumans, Daisy among them, to the Triskelion building outside Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, after Coulson and Captain America lifted off in the X-Fighter, Lucian slipped away from the Xavier Institute. He paused only long enough to whisper a few Strat, Agent points to Professor X, then vanished into the winding corridors. His goal was clear. The isolated island base Hydra had been using to manufacture energy weapons and conceal the cosmic cube. First, Lucian apparated to a rocky shoreline on the mainland. There, he unfurled his feathered wings and took flight, skimming just above the waves. But winged flight alone wouldn't get him there fast enough. Drawing on his mastery of magnetism, he accelerated by channeling a 10-ton force through an iron plate embedded in his shoe soles, allowing him to ride Earth's magnetic field lines like a railgun. He tweaked local gravity to generate added thrust, and even used mini recoil blasts against the sea's surface. Countless techniques combined to launch him toward the secret Hydra fortress at breakneck speed. Lucian raced through the upper atmosphere, each enchantment and modification humming in harmony as he shattered the sound barrier. The storm of air rushing past him felt alive, but his body, reinforced far beyond any normal human threshold, remained unshaken. Were he not so thoroughly enhanced, the G-forces alone would have torn him apart. He could slip into the iron armor spell for extra protection, but the added bulk and magical drag would slow him down, something he simply couldn't afford at supersonic speeds. Even so, Lucian couldn't help but think of Tony Stark's latest suits. Tony had mentioned, with a gleam of pride, that after integrating God Realm technology, his Iron Man armor now topped out at Mach 4. When Lucian had placed a custom metal prototype order last month, he'd paid a small fortune, and he still felt envious of Stark's edge. One day, he swore to himself, I'll design my own magical battlesuit. That goal had led him to seek out Urza Scarlet. Her mastery of transformation magic, summoning full suits of armor from a pocket dimension, was legendary in the Order of Knights. Under her tutelage, Lucian planned to develop a spell that would let him don enchanted plate in an instant. No clumsy incantations, no time lost strapping on pieces. Just a thought, and he'd be armored from head to toe. A glance at his arcane navigator confirmed he was crossing the right coordinates. In less than a minute, the misty outline of a remote island emerged below, jagged cliffs rising from dark, churning waters. He banked sharply, descending toward a cluster of massive concrete buildings, each emblazoned with the red and black Hydra logo. Lucian's jaw tightened. He leveled out just above treetop height, scanning for landing zones. Hydra had secrets hidden here, and he intended to uncover every last one. With his modified body and magical enhancements, he was more than ready for whatever lay ahead. Lucian pressed himself against a jagged outcropping of volcanic rock, watching the lone freighter moored at the island's makeshift pier. Hydra soldiers in dark uniforms hauled heavy crates aboard, boxes full of newly forged energy weapons destined for outposts across the globe. He allowed his breath to steady, then murmured the words of the illusion spell he'd mastered. In a flicker of gray-green light, he vanished. Invisible, Lucian slipped down the slope and merged with the soldiers' column, shadowing them past armed guards and into the heart of the base. Every shadowed corridor and flickering lamp remained oblivious to his presence. One thing puzzled him, though. Where were the robot sentries? In the stolen memories he'd extracted from Agent Sitwell, Baron Zemo had collaborated with Dr. Zola, using pilfered S-Shield technology, to build an army of Hydra automatons. Their sole purpose, as far as Lucian knew, was to guard the cosmic cube hidden somewhere on this island. Yet the corridors lay empty, silent of servo mechanisms and hydraulic hiss. Lucian smiled to himself. He didn't mind. With his magnetism honed to the point where he could lift tons of metal as easily as a feather, any robot would be helpless before him. If they did show up, he'd tear them apart before they even knew he was there, and then he'd press on, into the Vigavfoy, airy heart of Hydra's darkest secret. Lucian whispered the unlocking incantation, Allaho open, and watched as each heavy steel door slid aside in turn. At last, he stood before the pulsating heart of the base, the cosmic cube itself, its radiance dimmed as a massive extractor siphoned away its energy. An urgent klaxon shattered the silence. Red lights flickered overhead. Lucian's lips curved into a wry smile. They've got heat sensors, too, he muttered, slipping the disillusionment spell into his pocket. The alarms didn't faze him. He'd expected tighter security. He crossed to the energy converter, a hulking machine that drained the cube's power, refined it into a stable cerulean essence, sealed it in glass vials, and sent them whirring down a conveyor belt toward the storage chamber. Lucian reached out, plucked one of the jars from the moving belt, and twisted off its lid. With eyes closed, he settled into a meditative posture and drew the glowing energy into himself. Moments later, his eyes snapped open. A confident grin spread across his face. It works, he said softly. He could already feel his magical reserves swelling, energized by the blue core crystal within the vial. A hail of shouts cut through the chamber's alarm. Lucian sprang to his feet as a squad of Hydra soldiers stormed in, their energy rifles trained on him. There he is! Don't let him escape! Lucian slid into a ready stance, the emptied vial still gleaming in his hand. His next move would decide everything. When the Hydra agents spotted Lucian, they raised their energy rifles and squeezed the triggers, but they never managed to fire a single shot. With a sudden surge of power, Lucian seized control of every metallic component in their weapons. The rifles tore themselves free from the soldiers' grasp, spun around on their own, and discharged point-blank bolts that struck each man in the head. Moments later, the room fell deathly silent. Unfazed, Lucian tapped the control panel on his suit, shutting down its external systems. From a concealed pocket in his uniform, he withdrew a small steel case. Methodically, he placed the dismantled energy rifle and the glowing cosmic cube inside, snapped the lid shut, and slipped the case back into its hidden compartment. With his prize secured and his foes neutralized, he turned away, already planning his next move. Chapter 238, Absorbing Man's Sneak Attack. Update 1. Take flight! With a flick of his wrist, Lucian redirected the empty freight drone onto the facility's overhead rails. He then strode calmly along the conveyor belt, securing the cosmic cube and its extraction device in an isolation chamber. One by one, he loaded glass vials brimming with cobalt blue energy into the drone's reinforced compartments. Hydra troopers, armed to the teeth, swarmed the corridor behind him, desperate to retake the cube. Lucian met them unfazed. He deftly seized their own energy rifles and with deadly precision cut them down one after another. When the last soldier collapsed, he packed their rifles alongside the vials. Cube-powered weapons were far too valuable to leave behind. Deep within Hydra's underground command center, Professor Arnim Zola, his consciousness now fused with a robotic control network, watched the live feed. Lucian moved through the heart of the base as though it were unguarded, dismantling every threat in his path. The monitors sputtered, frost creeping across the edges of the display as the console's CPU emitted faint wisps of smoke. "Who is this man?" Zola murmured. He turned to the holographic interface and plunged into Hydra's intelligence archives, determined to uncover any record of their unstoppable intruder before Lucian could vanish with the cosmic cube. "Doctor," Zola leaned over the holoprojector in Hydra's shadowed command chamber, eyes narrowed as the image of the Super Academy flickered to life. Principal Pierce had just deployed their borrowed robot soldier, an engineered marvel combining magneto-like metal control, the telepathic reach of Professor X, and the raw crackle of summoned lightning. It was the perfect guardian for the cosmic cube. Moments later, the mech's systems completed the upload of Lucian's neural imprint. In the machine's synthesized voice, his final instruction rang out clearly: "You must not lose the cosmic cube." Zola's jaw tightened. He dedicated years to reclaiming this artifact, and now, with only the earliest stages of his research complete, he refused to surrender. If Hydra was ever to conquer Earth and cement its rule, the cube's boundless energy was indispensable. Without it, their most advanced weapons would be nothing more than metal husks. "Cal Creel," Zola barked into the comlink, "the intruder is inside the perimeter. Eliminate him, but remember, he commands metal. Do not assume your metal form." Creel's massive frame filled the doorway, fists cracking in anticipation. Once a promising boxer in Hell's Kitchen, he'd fallen out of favor after a match he was sure he'd win. So sure, in fact, that his boss had him thrown to the sharks when he lost. That betrayal still burned inside him, and now he strode forward to settle the score. Lucian surveyed the aftermath of the skirmish with a grim satisfaction. The absorbing man, Hydra's so-called perfect defender, lay unconscious at his feet. Carl Creel had once been an ordinary criminal until he'd accidentally awakened a terrifying power. By touch, he could rewrite the molecular structure of any living thing. S.H.I.E.L.D. had marked him as a person of interest, but Hydra had snatched him first, subjecting him to brutal enhancements in Arnim Zola's labs. Now Creel stood as Zola's personal bodyguard, a hulking colossus who could absorb virtually any force directed at him. Lucian remembered Dr. Zola's theory with a shudder. As long as Creel didn't transform into metal, Zola reasoned, Lucian's own metal manipulation powers would bounce right off him. And when Creel altered his cellular structure, his mind became sealed off, immune even to psychic intrusion. With half a dozen Hydra troops backing Creel, victory seemed impossible, until Lucian found the opening. Now the laboratory halls were silent, except for the distant hum of Hydra generators. Lucian had collected every glass vial of unstable energy bottles, wrested those prototype pulse rifles from the guards, and neutralized Creel in a single decisive strike. He planted a small, tracking rune beneath Creel's uniform, enough to lead him straight to Zola. Lucian's pulse quickened at the thought of confronting the mad scientist. Zola's warped experiments had already gifted Hydra with terrifying black technologies that could threaten the entire planet. Leaving the Doctor alive was out of the question. The Marvel Universe thrived on its heroes, but it was the scientists, men like Zola, who could tip the balance toward absolute ruin. He drew a steadying breath and whispered the incantation. A faint, silver glow traced the rune's lines as it activated. Lucian tucked his weapons, stolen Hydra tech, and a handful of energy vials into the satchel slung over his shoulder. With the tracking spell humming beneath his skin, he slipped out of the lab, the door sealing shut behind him with a soft click. Tomorrow, he would face Dr. Zola. Tonight, he prepared for a war of wits and wills. Because in a world of gods and monsters, the greatest danger often lay not in brute strength, but in the twisted brilliance of a single, unhinged mind. Hydra scientists may look harmless in their lab coats, but Lucian knew better than to underestimate them. Many of Marvel's greatest villains began behind microscopes and test tubes. Bolivar Trask with his sentinel automatons, the godlike Dr. Doom, Dr. Octopus, Dr. Kurt Connors as the Lizard, the Green Goblin, and, most disturbingly, Arnim Zola. Though fused with cybernetic grafts, Zola's human essence still endured, and so long as his soul remained intact, no tracking spell could fail. Lucian planted his feet and raised his staff. "Reveal his trail, Arnim Zola," he intoned. Golden footprints blossomed on the ground before him, glowing with magical energy and pointing steadily forward. Lucian followed, his eyes locked on the shimmering trail. But barely a dozen paces later, a phalanx of Hydra soldiers erupted from behind shattered columns. Instead of rifles, each trooper carried a reinforced, non-metallic shield, and with a roar, they charged. Lucian didn't hesitate. With a flick of his wrist, the hovering energy cannon at his hip sprang to life. Crackling pulses of light lanced out, snapping shields in half and flinging troopers to the ground. It was clear Zola had unmasked him, and had ordered these shield-bearers to close in for the kill. Energy beams sliced through the air, but Hydra's defenses held, for now. Yet Lucian felt the spell's pull growing stronger with every shot. Nothing would deter him from finding Arnim Zola and ending this threat once and for all. Lucian didn't need fancy shields. The Hydra soldiers in front of him were clutching chunks of solid wood and other improvised non-metallic barriers, pitiful defenses against his energy rifle. Before any of them could close the gap, bolts of searing energy tore through their cover. Most of the attackers dropped before they even realized what hit them. But Lucian wasn't done. As the few survivors stumbled toward his prone form, convinced he'd been taken out, his body erupted with electricity. A blinding flash, 20 million volts, and every last one of them was flung off their feet. He scrambled to his feet, intent on pushing forward, when a fist came crashing toward the back of his skull. Lucian twisted aside just in time. "There's actually a fish that slipped through my telepathy," a deep voice rumbled behind him. He whirled around to see a massive man in standard Hydra combat fatigues. The soldier's face glistened with a rubbery sheen, an odd coating that caught the light with every movement. Without hesitating, the brute unleashed a rapid-fire barrage of punches, each strike driven home with brutal precision. Lucian raised his arms to defend himself, his heart racing. This was no ordinary opponent, and the real fight was just beginning. Lucian had it all: magic, superhuman abilities, and a body far beyond that of ordinary people. His neurological reflexes alone set him leagues ahead. When the burly assailant lunged at him, Lucian sidestepped with calm precision. Only a moment's curiosity had kept him from using telepathy. After all, this man could withstand a 200 million volt shock, so Lucian assumed his mind would be shielded as well. Normally, any hint of malicious intent would trigger Lucian's psychic alarms immediately, but when the strong man collapsed to the ground, Lucian's senses remained silent. Interesting. He must be a superpowered individual too. Abandoning any further amusement, Lucian stepped back to evade a counterattack. He flicked a coin from his fingers, letting it spin in the air. Electromagnetic gun! The metal disc crackled with blue-white energy as it shot forward at supersonic speed. The coin struck the intruder square in the chest, tearing a fist-sized crater through muscle and bone. The man careened into the bunker wall, cracking concrete with the force of the impact. Lucian frowned. "He's not dead yet?" To his astonishment, the gaping wound began knitting itself closed. Flesh, muscle, even shattered ribs were formed under his eyes until the man stood there, unharmed, as though the gunshot had never happened. Lucian's jaw tightened. This was going to be more challenging than he'd thought. Lucian barely had time to react before the burly man lunged at him, eyes wild with pain. "It hurts so much. I'll kill you for this," the man roared. With a sudden motion, he drew a small chunk of granite from his pocket, his voice reverberating as he activated his power. In an instant, his entire body hardened into the unbreakable stone, then he leapt through the air toward Lucian with terrifying force. Lucian staggered back, astonished. The man's flesh had melted from something rubbery into solid rock. He must be one of those absorbers rumored to exist. The name flashed through Lucian's mind just as the granite giant came down in a crushing blow. Instinct took over. Lucian whipped out his wand, stance firm, and bellowed the words he never thought he'd use. Avada Kedavra! A flash of emerald light shot from his wand, striking the granite form squarely in the chest. The impact shattered the man's stony exterior in a burst of dust and pebbles. In the blink of an eye, his body reverted to its human shape. His eyes fluttered closed, and he crumpled to the ground, his breath stilled forever. Lucian stood over the still figure, his wand trembling in his hand. The battle was over, but the cost weighed heavy on him. He glanced down at the fallen man, the echo of stone breaking still ringing in his ears. Chapter 239, Consciousness Storage Device, Second Update. Interesting, but not exactly mind-blowing, Lucian said coolly, kicking the fallen absorber aside. He cast a sidelong glance at the surveillance monitor in the upper corner and offered a mocking grin. "Dr. Zola," he called out, voice echoing through the speakers. "If you've got any more tricks hidden up your sleeve, now's the time to show them. After this, you won't get another chance." On the other end, Zola's voice trembled with barely concealed fury. "How? What kind of ability is that? Why did the absorber just collapse without even reacting?" She stared at Lucian's impassive smile on the screen, her composure cracking. Curse you! She'd promised payback for her humiliation, and she meant it. But there would be no time for threats or taunts. With a flick of her wrist, Zola activated the flight module implanted in her suit. She hurtled through a shattered window and shot into the sky, streaking away from the island in a flash of iridescent light. Even as she fled, Zola relied on her consciousness storage system. Once her current body suffered irreparable damage, her mind would upload instantaneously through the secure network to a dormant backup drive. From there, she could download herself into a spare robotic frame, effectively granting her endless resurrections. Yet every revival carried its own unseen cost. Creating a storage unit for consciousness is an intricate undertaking, demanding extensive time and painstaking preparation. Every time Lucian activates the process, he must devote weeks, sometimes months, to constructing the next backup, ensuring he can resurrect if destroyed. Each transfer also drains his mind, leaving him mentally vulnerable until he fully recovers. That's why he refuses to damage his robotic shell unless it's absolutely necessary. In truth, that shell isn't fragile. It bristles with advanced weapon systems, and since integrating the cosmic Rubik's Cube as its power source, has been armed with energy weapons far more devastating than Hydra's mass-produced soldiers. By his calculations, Lucian has better than an 80% chance of defeating Iron Man in a straight fight, if only Tony Stark couldn't manipulate metal and render him completely immobile. As Lucian soared above the base, preparing to accelerate away, his body froze mid-flight. At that moment, a voice rang out from behind him. "Dr. Zola, where do you think you're going?" Lucian's heart raced as the tip of his tracking spell jerked violently, redirecting him away from the base. He'd never suspected Zola was preparing to flee. Yet his vision was unnaturally keen. A glance out the window revealed her silhouetted against the night sky. In a heartbeat, he apparated to her side, raised his wand, and wove a binding charm. The metal servos of Zola's robotic shell obeyed him instantly. His mastery over metal utterly outmatched any conventional technology. Zola's body froze in midair. Realizing she'd lost control of this vessel, she stifled her panic. She still had one desperate gambit left. Ever since perfecting her consciousness transfer technique, she'd planted a self-destruct core deep inside the robot. If cornered by an unbeatable adversary, she could trigger a chain reaction that would obliterate both machine and me. Her voice rang out in defiance. "Long live Hydra!" Instead of triumph, Lucian felt a chill. That cry was her signal. While maintaining his hold on her metal frame, he swept his wand in a precise arc. "Glacius Runeus," he intoned. A torrent of frost magic surged through the shell's circuitry, encasing its core in ice. Sparks hissed as every wire and circuit fused shut, neutralizing the self-destruct before it could ignite. Suspended in a web of arcane steel and frost, Zola's eyes widened. Her final attack had failed, and now she was utterly at his mercy. All set. In an instant, every servo, gear, and circuit inside the mech ground to a halt, as though time itself had frozen. Only Zola's consciousness, flickering on the chest monitor, remained active. How is this possible? Even the self-destruct won't engage. A surge of panic rippled through Zola's digital mind. He had lost every command override. There was no emergency jettison, no manual upload to the reserve bank. Under normal protocols, destruction of the chassis or voluntary relinquishment of control would trigger an automatic transfer of his consciousness to a secure backup. Now he was trapped, imprisoned in cold steel with no exit. He clung to one small consolation. Lucian's psychic powers were limited to living beings. According to every file and datasheet, telepathy and mind control had no effect on hardware. No one could seize control of this machine with psionic force. At least Zola was safe from that threat, however dire his situation might become. Lucian's heart pounded. He still couldn't read his adversary's mind or discern their true condition. His one ace, baiting the enemy into destroying his body so his consciousness could slip into the reservoir and be reborn elsewhere, had failed. Once again, his calculations had been off. He glanced at Zola's android frame, now freshly repaired. A surge of resolve ran through him as he laid his hand on the cool metal plating. Channeling the electromagnetic power he'd inherited from Makoto Misaka, he sent invisible currents racing through Zola's circuitry. In an instant, electrons bent to his will, firewalls dissolved, code loops unraveled, and the machine's defenses fell away. Like Misaka herself, Lucian could hack any device without a single cable, simply by touching its surface and translating his thoughts directly into executable commands. So that's how it works, he murmured, watching streams of data cascade inside his mental HUD. Every barrier he encountered flickered and vanished under his control. Yet even as the system yielded, a nagging doubt tugged at him. His reservoir trick was too unpredictable, too sloppy to trust again. After a moment, Lucian withdrew his hand from Zola's chassis and stepped back. He needed a new plan, and he needed it fast. Lucian studied the glowing readout in the robot's chest, where Dr. Zora's consciousness flickered on the display. He'd already absorbed all the data and intelligence stored there. Every memory, every secret. A cold certainty settled over him. Consciousness implies a soul, he muttered. And if there's a soul, I know exactly how to deal with it. He raised his wand in a swift, practiced motion. Avada Kedavra! A bolt of green light shot from the tip and struck the robot's torso. The display shuddered as Zora's digital likeness, his very essence, began to unravel pixel by pixel. No, this can't be happening, the doctor's voice crackled through the speakers, panic lacing every syllable. My consciousness. Lucian watched impassively as the last embers of Zora's mind winked out. He had known that even if he spared Zora's body, the wizard would remain imprisoned here, always plotting an escape. But by destroying the soul directly, he had erased any chance of resurrection. The enchantment targeted essence itself. Without it, there was no backup drive, no alternate vessel, no loophole. Good thing I remembered the killing curse hits the soul, Lucian said quietly to himself. Otherwise, a genius like him would be impossible to finish off. In ordinary circumstances, Dr. Zora's hybrid physiology, part mechanical, part human, would have made him nearly immortal. But magic that severs the soul leaves nothing behind to reassemble. Lucian slipped his wand back into his coat and turned away from the lifeless machine, certain that the threat had finally been neutralized. No matter how many bodies you destroy, his consciousness still lingers in the network, and from there he simply transfers into another robotic shell to come back. It's much like Ultron, but the moment true awareness and intellect arise, a soul is born. And once a soul exists, we can employ magic that targets it directly. That's the beauty of being a mage. Comprehensive solutions for every kind of enemy. Whatever form your foe takes, there's always a way to deal with it. Chapter 240, Assault on the Three-Winged Facility, 3rd update. This base is finished. Having secured the Cosmic Cube, neutralized Dr. Zora, and extracted every scrap of her research, Lucian had more than fulfilled his orders. Now there was only one task left: obliterate the stronghold. Hovering high above the installation, he raised his wand and unleashed volley after volley of explosive magic. A standard adult wizard's blast could flatten a few buildings. A first-rank sorcerer like Pettigrew could level an entire street. Lucian's own skill with destructive spells, honed through relentless practice, already surpassed that of most wizards, but still fell short of Pettigrew's legendary prowess. Fortunately, his wand's arcane amplifier boosted each incantation more than 20-fold, propelling him into the top tier. "Thunderblast!" he cried, and each thunderous eruption tore through reinforced walls and steel supports. Within moments, the once impenetrable Hydra base was nothing more than smoldering ruin. Lucian slipped away from the island at dawn, hot on the heels of the massive transport vessel where Hydra had just stowed its cache of experimental energy weapons. With a single, precision strike, he commandeered every last device, locked the stunned Hydra soldiers below deck, and sent their ship to the bottom, quite literally feeding the fishes. As he keyed his comlink, he said, "Plot a course for Washington. It's time to see just how deep Hydra's reach goes." He couldn't shake his old confidence. He'd once assumed that, with Captain America, Wolverine, the Hulk, and the Winter Soldier at his side, backed by Coulson's S.H.I.E.L.D. team, taking down Alexander Pierce would be straightforward. After all, in the films, Steve Rogers, Falcon, and Black Widow dismantled Pierce's schemes without breaking a sweat. But Zora's latest intel told a different story. Hydra was reinforcing its ranks with countless combat robots, and Pierce himself might possess powers rivaling the Absorbing Man. Even Project Insight felt like a ticking time bomb. Once those 3 helicarriers ascended to protect the world by neutralizing perceived threats, they'd become giant airborne targets, ripe for retaliation. Lucian reminded himself that Earth teems with hidden dragons and crouching tigers, superhumans lying in wait, ready to strike. Caution wasn't just prudent, it was the only way to survive what came next. Lucian stared at the holographic display hovering above the conference table, the schematics of Hydra's Insight plan glowing in cold blue light. This wasn't merely an American threat. It was a coordinated strike against every nation on Earth, launched from orbital aerospace carriers. The missiles were all but guaranteed to be intercepted before they reached their targets. Lucian's proposal was simple. Let Superpower Academy shoot them down. If the Academy's pilots and anti-missile units intercepted Hydra's warheads, the world's top leaders would see firsthand the school's capabilities and owe them a debt of gratitude. By turning a looming global crisis into a triumphant demonstration, Superpower Academy would win political favor, secure future funding, and establish itself as an indispensable partner to every government on the planet. Of course, Lucian emphasized, those diplomatic perks were secondary. First and foremost, the Academy had to hone its own strength, its students, its technology, and its tactics. If an opportunity arose to showcase that power to world leaders, they would seize it. But they would never sacrifice rigorous training or strategic readiness just to curry favor. He tapped a control console. "Prepare the intercept teams," he ordered. "We'll prove to the world that Superpower Academy doesn't just talk about strength. We deploy it when it matters most." Lucian had always believed that raw power could solve every problem. If he could obliterate a planet with a single blow, no head of state on Earth would dare challenge him, let alone the tangled web of lesser agencies and officials. Yet his ambitions reached far beyond mere planetary domination. Countless worlds teemed with life across the cosmos. Unnumbered universes lay beyond our own, and outside even the vast Marvel multiverse existed infinite realms. He craved them all, and not just the starry expanse, but the heavens and every hidden world within it. Only by staking a claim among the gods of these realms could he find true purpose. In the blink of an eye, Lucian materialized on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., then surged towards S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Triskelion headquarters at impossible speed. At the same moment, after a half-hour sprint through the sky, the sleek X-Fighter glided into position above the Triskelion building, its pilot braced for whatever confrontation lay ahead. "What on earth are those things?" Coulson's voice rang out, tight with disbelief, as he stared at the Triskelion's facade bristling with hundreds of armored sentries, each emblazoned with the Hydra insignia. He'd never suspected Hydra could field an entire legion of robots, let alone equip them with crackling energy weapons. "Original plan's a bust," Steve said grimly, lowering his shield with a metallic click. We need a new strategy. Now. Captain America's jaw clenched beneath his cowl. Their original orders had been clear. Breach the Triskelion at maximum speed, neutralize Hydra's soldiers, and capture Alexander Pierce before his 3 airborne carriers could launch. Lucian had already handled the Winter Soldiers and Pierce's elite guard at the Shield Academy, crippling the building's defenses. With the Hulk barreling in front of them, victory should have been a foregone conclusion. But Pierce had clearly laid a contingency. This robotic phalanx was his hidden ace. As energy beams flared to life along the Triskelions' walls, Steve knew any straightforward assault would now be suicide. Fury, he radioed. We're going to need heavy support, and fast. Coulson swallowed hard and tapped his comlink. On it, Cap, shields mobilizing every asset in range. As the armored robots whirred into action, Steve glanced at Lucian. The young operative had proven himself time and again. Together, they'd have to improvise a new battle plan on the fly. The fate of the Triskelion, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. There may be more defenses in play than just those robot soldiers, Lucian said, studying the holomap of the Triskelion complex. We need a more cautious approach this time. Logan, you've worked with Stark before. Reach out and see if he can come lend a hand. He's our best bet for disabling those sentries. Coulson, keep pushing the government for support. Get the nearest army unit mobilized. Once we've got those in motion, we split into 2 assault teams. Lucian's plan was straightforward, and given their circumstances, the most practical option. In a few minutes, he, Logan, and Bruce Banner would launch a direct offensive on the Triskelions' front entrance. Lucian's vibranium shield would absorb the worst of Hydra's heavy fire. Logan's accelerated healing would keep him standing against any counterattack, and Hulk, fully unleashed, could withstand the energy cannons long enough to draw every last shot their way. Meanwhile, Coulson, Bucky, and the SHIELD veterans would approach from the opposite flank, slipping past Hydra's perimeter under the X-Fighters' cloaking field. Their mission: breach the building, find the aerospace carrier's launch control room, and shut down the takeoff sequence before the weaponized craft ever leaves the runway. With roles assigned and contingencies in place, Lucian glanced at each teammate in turn. Time to move, he said, and the 2 teams melted into the shadows, ready to strike. If Tony can make it here in time, we'll have our best shot, especially if the nearby military lends a hand. Pierce will expect us to try and stop the aerospace carriers from launching, and sooner or later, he'll catch on to Coulson's infiltration. Once he realizes what's happening, his orders will hinge on one question. Do we send every robot we've got after Coulson's team, or do we focus on the launch site itself? If Pierce pulls forces back to deal with Coulson, the pressure at the carrier pad eases, giving our trio a real opportunity to break through the defenses and get inside the hangar. We don't even need to hunt for a hidden control room. The 3 massive carriers are out in the open. We just have to disable them directly. Hulk's raw strength is perfect for ripping structures apart, and Wolverine's adamantium claws can slice through hull plating like butter. As for Lucian, his newly reforged shield, tempered in Uru metal by the Dwarf King, has never been sharper. He can hurl it with deadly precision and call it back, or use its razor-thin edge to carve through steel. Together, they'll turn those carriers into scrap before Pierce even knows what hit him. With everyone's consent secured, Steve gave the order. All right, let's move. And just like that, the assault on the Triskelion building began. Attackers surged forward under Steve's command, while defenders took up their positions inside, bracing for the fight to come.